That's fine.
Switches. You're about. I'm just gonna do it now. Beautiful.
Yes. I'm so excited.
Christina, nice to meet you.
Okay, we're going to get ready to start. Everyone wants to come and take their seats. So, first of all, I would just like to welcome everyone to the second annual Circus Meets Medicine Conference. I want to thank everyone that was able to come in person so much for being here. And I'd like to also thank everyone online for tuning in as well. We're going to start today with just an introduction of me and Scott, who we are, why we're doing this, and then we're going to go right into our first lectures of the morning. So, I'm Dr. Hollister, I'm Dr. Nate Hollister. I am a third-year emergency medicine resident at UNLV, working at University Medical Center. I got interested in everything that's going on with circus and medicine from young age, was a competitive gymnast growing up, had my share of injuries, had my share of broken bones, concussions, ER visits, tried to avoid it like the plague, like most of our other performers and athletes here, before going to med school. And my circus journey started in med school when COVID happened and I was no longer able to use any gyms or do any activities that I normally was doing, and flying trapeze became the option of choice because the nearest person is holding lines for you down on the ground and you are about 3 stories in the air, far away from everyone else. From that, I started a residency here in Las Vegas, which I have absolutely adored. I've gotten to work at the Level 1 Trauma Center where I get to take care of all of the people coming in with big injuries. I get to take care of my friends, other performers, and just our local community here in Vegas. And I really met Scott at Circus Center, where we were training and we were working together and just realizing some of the holes and gaps in medical knowledge and what our providers knew about circus performers and about performers in general. And it really opened my eyes working with Scott, not only the blind spots in my colleagues and just the hospital and medical system in general, but also in myself, of how to really take care of athletes and take care of really these elite performers performing at the kind of pinnacle of human performance. So that's me. I'm going to let Scott introduce himself as well, and then we'll just go into our introduction.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here. As Nate said, this is the second annual Circus Meets Medicine Conference. I am a circus performer and coach. I've been in a few Cirque du Soleil productions. I currently work over at Chris Angel, functioning as both a performer and coach for the show. And yeah, as Nate said, we met at Circus Center and immediately bonded over this sort of shared enthusiasm for such a niche thing as circus, and specifically circus injuries. Obviously, we're not enthusiastic about getting injured, but rather, how do we treat this? Because we have so many circus artists in town, I think arguably more than literally anywhere else in the world. We have more shows than anywhere else in the world. We have more technicians, coaches, former world champions and Olympians. There's plenty of them sitting in the room right now. And yet, so many of these people have just kind of flown under the radar. And as of late, with Las Vegas developing more sports teams and major entertainment events, I think the city has become a little more conscious of how many professional athletes we have, and yet still, they don't necessarily realize that for 30 years now, we've had this slew of absolute, acrobatic gods, for lack of a better description, just kind of hanging out. And speaking as someone who's suffered quite a few very specific circus injuries of my own, I fractured my skull falling off of a trampoline, broken ribs, double bouncing people on trampolines, herniated discs in my neck, doing stunt fighting, gone to the hospital for splitting my chin or the side of my head open with a sear wheel, and then having to explain to the ER docs and nurses what is a sear wheel and why would I be doing this. For anyone who doesn't know, a sear wheel is a giant metal hoop that you spin around in. So, without video evidence, it can be very difficult as a circus artist to fully explain what you're going through, and the fact that this isn't just a hobby for you or something that you were messing around on. It's your passion, it's your livelihood, it's your career, and you can't just stop if the doctor says, oh, that hurts? Well, don't do that then. So, given that we have such a huge host of people who come from all different countries, different backgrounds, different sporting disciplines, we just wanted to do this event as a way of bringing a little more awareness and advocacy to our local performers, and honestly beyond that, everyone else associated with this whole industry. When you have riggers whose job is to make sure someone is safe when they're doing aerial work, for example, there's a large amount of stress and psychological factors that go into that. A lot of people always think about the people they see on stage, but not necessarily the entire umbrella of people waiting in the wings, hiding behind so that these people can perform the way they do. So, I will stop babbling, but thank you all so much for being here, and let's get started.
Perfect. So just as we start, I wanted to give just a brief overview of what led to the creation of this. Me and Scott, as well as one of the other speakers, Dr. Domanski, worked on a study earlier last year where we surveyed circus performers and just their access and feelings towards medicine. If you were here last year, this is a little bit similar with some just more data that was mined out from the research, but just want to get everyone on the same page of what really started the idea of this. So we looked at circus artists in this study because they were elite athletes, they had high risks of injuries, and also being an ER doctor and an academic, the first thing I did when I started seeing these injuries and seeing these patterns in my own practice, in my own life, I went to the literature and I said, well, what do we have published so far? And we had a few studies. We had a few studies out there. Generally, they were either low-powered or a low total population. So in research, we call that an N. How many participants did you look at? There are some great people out there doing research, but honestly, for how wide and varied of a discipline circus is, it was really a poorly studied population, especially when you compare it to football, soccer, baseball, anything like that. We sent this out to professional performers, and so professional performers was defined as someone that is getting paid for what they do. This was not only people that were working resident shows or traveling shows, this was also gig workers. This is also people that are doing short-term contracts. That can be a weekend, it can be a week, it can be a month, it can be a few months. But we looked at the wide variety of people getting about 140 responses, pretty even between male and female, and covered wide variety of disciplines. This was not all aerialists, this was not all ground acrobats. This was widely distributed over all of the disciplines. What we initially found was really saddening to me, just as a physician and someone who's made my livelihood trying to take care of people, and this being a population that's close to my heart. We found that, starting in the upper left corner, we had looked, about 60% were currently performing, 40% were not. That was either they had retired and had been a professional performer, or they were in between contracts, or in between gigs. Of them, we asked, how many of you have purposely avoided seeking medical care? And that's how we left the question. Almost 69%, 68.35% of individuals stated that at least once they had purposefully avoided seeking medical care for an injury that they knew they had. And just to be aware, that is self-reported. So that is the people that have admitted to avoiding seeking medical care on a survey. Looking again, more than half, almost 52% of people have also admitted to not only avoiding seeking medical care, but actively hid an injury, meaning they had an injury that they knew about and they took steps to conceal that injury. So we started to think about why. Why might this be the case? First thing that pops into our head is insurance. If you're uninsured, you don't want to go because I don't know what bill I'm going to get. They do a CT scan, that's what, how many thousands of dollars? But we found that almost 80%, 78.41% of people had insurance. They had coverage of some kind. So maybe it was still the co-pays, maybe there was cost involved, but these were at least insured individuals. Of those people, I started to think, okay, well, what else is there access to healthcare? So I looked at how many of them had a primary care doctor. Normally you're supposed to see your primary care doctor at least once a year. I thought, let's loosen it a little bit, just say anyone that's seen a primary care doctor in the last 3 years expanded to 3 times what you're generally supposed to do. Less than half of people stated that they had a primary care doctor, meaning seeing someone in the last 3 years. More than half had not. And I don't have the percentage in here, but a fair percent have never seen a primary care doctor. And then I said, well, then who do they see? And so we got our next box where they're seeing, more than half are seeing a physical therapist of some kind. The majority of them are seeing massage therapists, 61.15. And about 22% are seeing a chiropractor. We looked into other things like naturopaths and yogis and things like that. Those were smaller percentages than 20%, so these are the ones I included. So I thought maybe they just don't like us. Maybe we're doing something wrong. So we looked at a satisfaction survey just on a Likert score, looking from 1 to 5. 5 is, I absolutely love them, they're fantastic. 1 is, hate them, would never see them ever again. And I looked at it by specialty. You can see our non-physician specialists, that is our physical therapist, massage therapist, anyone that's not MD or DO. Had high satisfaction ratings. People really like seeing these people. Even the specialists, that's your orthopedic surgeons, your ENT, anyone that is a specialist trained physician. They get 3.95, not bad. Where we really weren't doing too hot was in emergency medicine and urgent care, which, you know, being an emergency doctor, you know, hit the pride a little bit, but when you go and reflect about it, it makes sense. If all we have to offer in emergency medicine is take 2 weeks off, forego 2 weeks of pay, don't do anything, don't do the thing that gives you like joy, entertainment, it's your social circle a lot of times, the people you hang out with, the people that you work with, and we're saying, don't do that for 2 weeks, I just don't do anything, go watch some Netflix. It's very understandable why we don't have the highest satisfaction rating on those. I also just looked at why people don't seek care. And we asked just what are the reasons? What are some of the reasons? Again, these were kind of spattered all over the place, but these were the 6 that kind of stood out on our survey. First is cost. That always makes sense. You're always gonna have a copay. You're always gonna have some fee for service. You're gonna have a deductible. So fear that I'm gonna go and get a big bill. Am I gonna be able to afford this? Is a big reason. The other ones are a little more sad in my opinion, of the distrust in the doctor's ability to help. Almost 40%, more than 1/3 of people just had to distrust, the doctor's not gonna tell me anything. They're just gonna tell me rest. They don't understand what I do. They're not gonna be able to help in a meaningful way, so why would I waste the money to go and see them? They can't help me in a meaningful way. Almost an equal amount also thought, it's not a big deal at this time. This injury, I can walk it off, I can shake it off, I can stretch it out. 38% didn't want to go seek medical care because they didn't think it was a big deal for their injury at that time. 32% going down didn't go and seek medical care because they had a fear of losing their job or not getting paid. Like I said, if I tell you to take 2 weeks off and this is your job, if you're getting paid per show, if you're getting paid on a contract and you have to shorten that contract, you're getting paid per week. I'm not only sending you a bill for my medical services, I'm also telling you to take a pay cut, which is difficult for a lot of people. 33% mentioned a lack of time. They didn't have a time. If you're on a rigorous show schedule and you're on a rigorous training schedule, your show gets out late at night, doctor's offices are open from 9 to 5, but you're asleep in the morning and you're out at training in the afternoon, maybe there's just not availability. I don't have time to go and seek the medical care I need. And then lastly, the 20% is peer pressure, others' perceptions. That's just what fit here. The way the question was worded and the way that we got 3 responses in this was it was not wanting to let people down. It was not wanting to let the show down, not wanting to let your castmates down, not wanting to let other people down from your absence or your showing of an injury. And so over 1/5 of individuals stated that that was a large reason to why they didn't seek care. And we gave options for kind of free fill, like, do you have any thoughts about this? Is there anything that you would like to say, you would like the doctors to know, your medical care to know? And this was just some of the things that the professional performers have said. And so one individual said that they wish that there was more understanding of circus live performance related activities and that they would not always be related to sports. It's easy for us as physicians that know baseball or we know soccer, we know football to be like, oh, that, like it's an overhead thing, it's like a baseball throw. And kinda, but not really, not always. Or, oh, it's an ankle thing, you twisted it while tumbling. Like, oh, well, like soccer players will twist it on the ball sometimes. Not always the same. It can be a similarity, but not always. Another individual said that their primary care and medical specialists are great people, but they feel that modern medicine is too biomedical and not functional enough. They see them when they have to and then take that information to another provider to get true help. Another individual said that sometimes it's hard to get practitioners to understand what we do with our bodies. I had a hip injury, and when she asked me what it prevented me from doing, like walking or caring for myself, I told her I couldn't do my splits. She didn't even know what to do with that. She kind of laughed at me. And lastly, circus artists are some of the most physically adept and rigorous trained people on the planet. We have developed our bodies to be able to do things that your average person couldn't even imagine doing. As such, we really cannot be treated in the same way. In recovery, we have to get past just functioning on a base level. We need to be able to make it back to 100% where we were before the injury, or even better than that. And unfortunately, it has been my experience that doctors do not generally have the level of understanding needed to be able to treat us efficiently. So this has been very depressing. These are not very happy quotes, but this is what kind of motivated me and Scott and a lot of the people in the audience that have been working with us and have been advocating for circus in the public spheres. It's been what motivated us to today and is what brings us to today. So today we have a great schedule today. We have some great talks in the morning. We will break for lunch and we will all show you where there's a food court just down the way. And then we will have our keynotes in the early afternoon. Followed by another short break, and then in the evening we will be bringing some of our performers in, especially for the medical personnel, just to show you what they do. This will be a stripped down performance, not flashy lights, not flashy costumes, and we will also be giving our performers an opportunity to talk and explain what they're doing, explain what hurts, explain what they're feeling, explain what forces it is they feel in their body, so that we can have a better understanding. And so, without further ado, we will start our schedule for the morning, and I'm going to welcome up our first speaker. So, our first speaker is Alya, who's going to be coming up and sharing just some of her stories with us. So, I will let Alya introduce herself, and if we could all give her a warm welcome.
First of all, I want to say thank you to Nathan and Scott for doing this research, because all this is true. I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Alya Titarenko. I came from Ukraine back in 1997 to join Circus creation of O, which was 27 years ago. And prior to coming to Cirque, I was already 2 times world champion in sports acrobatics. So I knew the world of sports. I knew nothing about Cirque du Soleil, even being on the plane to Montreal to do operations. I still knew nothing about Cirque du Soleil, because at that time the company was very small. And then I didn't want to be in Cirque du Soleil. I ended up being there for 22 years. You know, sometimes something very temporary can become very permanent. And what I want to say is that I'm from Ukraine, as I said, you will hear an accent, but that's what Circus World is all about. We are a very international company. And in one show, like, we had 18 different nationalities, 11 languages, and you work together. You learn to work together, to understand each other, to trust your life to each other, and different nationalities, different cultures, different traditions, different superstitions. All this you need to learn to respect and to make it work. Now, while I was in Cirque du Soleil, I wasn't in the same show. I did actually 5 different shows. I was on permanent show, on tour, came back here and left again. I did 8 different acts. Not everybody is like this. Some people prefer to stick with what they do, and they keep just staying with what they are doing. I chose a different way. And it actually was extremely interesting and helpful and very rich in experience, because it really taught me all of that. You know, I had my fair amount of injuries, of course, but because I kept moving, I kept changing what I was doing, I think I lasted much longer. Because as an artist, you need to learn what it means longevity and consistency. So while I was also performing in Cirque du Soleil, I kept competing in a different sport, and I came again 2 times world champion in a different sport. So I was on all 4 times world champion. So again, I knew the world of being an athlete. And when you become a circus performer and coming from the world of sports, it's very different. You have to remember that athlete is not a circus performer. You have, as an athlete, you have off-season time. As a performer, you have 0 off-season time. Or you might have 2 weeks. This is your off-season time. So you don't have a luxury. Sometimes when it goes like this, you know, you go on the beach and you gain weight, and then, well, you have to come back and actually carry yourself up there, up in the air, and then it's your responsibility to be able to stay in shape. And as an athlete, you learned, well, you have a coach. You have a lot of coaches who will help you with this and that, and depends on the level of being an athlete in circus, circus in sports. You might have 5 different coaches just on you. In circus, it doesn't happen. In circus, most of the time, coaches, they're more managers. They help you to manage you, and to help you maybe last longer. But it's actually an artist's responsibility to be able to do all the strength conditioning that's required, to be able to stay, mentally focused. Because mental health as a performer is extremely important. Like, for example, me, I'm afraid of heights. I ended up being an aerial athlete. How? I do not know. I'm afraid of deep water, and I was on an old show of, being scuba diving. I still don't know how it happened, but it had happened. So, and then you learn how to work with it. And there are some people who have a hard time to get into this. So you need to be able to help them, and then they have to stay focused. What I want to say about the medical, like I had a different way of preparing a different speech, but actually this research made me relate to my own life as a performer. Now, I've stopped performing after 22 years. I did a full circle, and I thought, okay, it's time to move on, and I'm a strength conditioning coach right now. So I'm coaching people, I'm coaching some artists, and it's very helpful because I've done myself all kind of different work. I came as a quarter in sports acrobatics. I don't know how much many of you know what those disciplines are, and I ended up being an aerial artist. When you, for example, I had an incident back in 2007 when I was working in a live show, and my coach is sitting here, so he remembers that, probably. I was flying in the air on the straps. Aerial strap is when you have no safety. It's basically you wrap the strap around, it's different now, but at that time you wrap the strap around and you hold it in your hand. You open your hand, you're done. Your life is over. So you just do that, and while you're afraid of heights, you're flying there and trying to think that this is your life there. Okay? And so I was doing my aerial act, and at one point I felt my rib dislocated. It just felt deep. But I'm flying around, and I'm doing stuff, and I know that my mind starts to race. What do I do? What do I do? I cannot come down because I have to be brought down. I cannot just jump down. And I just kept doing what I was doing, and I could feel my rib goes in and out, and I'm trying to breathe. And then finally, when the act was over, somehow I finished it, with adrenaline rushing in. And then you're doing all this crazy stuff, but suddenly you could not walk, you just freeze. And they took me to Concentra. And I'm in pain, my rib is sticking out, I'm trying to breathe there. And then the doctor came out, he looked at me and he did this, literally this. He put his hands behind his back, he said, I've never seen anything like this, I don't know what to do with you. And I was like, I'm in pain, could you please do something? I'm in real pain, it's been a few hours, I'm in pain, I don't know. He's like, you have to go to a different place. And he walked away. And I just stood there, still having a hard time to breathe, I didn't know what to do. So they took me to a different place, still they couldn't help me. They gave me some just medication to relax. And then finally when, going to one doctor, another doctor, here sometimes, nothing to say bad about doctors, but sometimes from my experience, if you're a doctor of the right hand, doesn't mean you're a doctor of the left hand, something like that. So finally when they brought me to a doctor who was dealing with professional football players, he's like, oh yeah, I know this injury. It was too late, the rib healed in the wrong place. He goes, well, if you want, I can break it again. I'm like, well, no, thank you. I'm going to stay as it is. And then I was an athlete, I was a performer who wanted to perform, who was eager to perform. I did not want to get off stage. So I was very loyal to my coach, saying, I was really angry, and like, I have to perform, I want to go back. He goes, well, you have to give it time to heal. And so finally, it healed in the wrong place, but that you know, it was 17 years ago, and I still, oh, so sorry, 17 years ago, and I still remember that the doctor who put his hands behind his back, and he said, I've never seen anything like this, I don't know what to do with you. And then besides that, it takes time to explain that, you know, Russian swing is not the swing on the playground. You know, it's actually going around and you can fall and can be fatal fall. You know, if you're doing aerial stretches, like what is that? Well, it's a stretch that you're flying around, you're doing upside down things and you're turning around. And this takes time to explain. While you explain all this, the time is running, right? So the injury can get worse by minutes sometimes, you know, sometimes it's very much that. So as an athlete or as actually a performer, I would probably ask maybe people who, or doctors who are interested to work with performers to learn the disciplines, to know aerial straps, aerial rings, hand-to-hand, adagio, below death, hook diving, all of those disciplines require different things. And a different performer, you have different acts, you have solo acts. Clearly you're one who's performing. You have small group acts, 2 to 3 people. You have big group acts, like house tour acts. You have synchronized swimmers, dancers, singers. Even they experience, you know, injuries. Because what it is being a performer, it's you're in a circuit. It's repeat, repeat, repeat. And sometimes the injury is just overuse. You know, overuse because you do the same things in the show. And since you have no off-season time, the director is asking you, or the coaches, you need to pump up your game, you need to do something stronger. You're rehearsing it, but you're rehearsing it that you still have to go back on stage tonight and perform 2 more shows. You know, so it's a constant work on the body. And I wish that doctors would understand again the requirements, what it requires to be a performer, what it requires to be an aerial performer. Or you're being an aerial flyer who's flying around, who's basically has to be so flexible on the shoulders, right? You are a catcher who is also up in the air, but you're actually catching this person who's flying around, right? And you can be on the floor, but you can be a porter who's catching and throwing people. You can be a flyer who has different requirements. And you do synchronized swimmer. You have again different requirements from your body. You're a dancer, again different requirements. So all of those things that even though you're just an artist, imagine like a one-word artist, but you can be a very different artist, depending what you do. And then we take, I would say an artist is different from an athlete, and a female artist is different from a male artist. Because as a female artist, you know, this is your career. At some point, you don't want to start a family. But it's very different from the guys, right? So the girl, we have to take a break. You have to take a break. I have 2 children myself who were born in Circus time, and I was not doing that the way I was doing it. Like with my first kid, I was on stage performing till 32 weeks of pregnancy. That was that time. And then I had C-section and I came back 2 months later. It was too fast. And I know it now. But that time, I didn't see that. I saw the stage. I saw the, you know, my target, and I wanted to get there. So I think it's also important, maybe from even the doctors or even PMAT point of view, to explain us what it is to go through, you know, natural delivery or C-section, how you're coming back. And sometimes artists, female artists, are being rushed to come back. You know, first of all, you have this motherhood stress, and then your body, your core is completely torn apart. You have to bring it back, not just looking good. It's not just appearance, but actually functionality. You have to be functional, and that's your safety as well. If you're up there, up in the air, you need to be able to pull yourself up, to bring your legs up, getting back on trapeze, and actually stay there. Because my second child I had when I was 41. And 3 months later, like again, bunch of weight, I wasn't performing anymore, I gained 50 pounds of weight because that's my baby was required. And then 3 months later, I was approached to do a stunt, aerial stunt in the movie Wonder Woman 84. I was like, I don't watch this kind of movies, but I know what they made, how big movies they are. I'm like, when is the filming? In 3 months? So it would be 6 months postpartum. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. So I had to do aerial stuff. I had to do bungees and aerial straps. And I gave myself a goal, and I was preparing, having different knowledge than after my first baby. Because I was younger, I didn't know what I know right now. So I had a much better preparation, but I was really focused on core strength. core strength, because sometimes you come back and you think, well, I look good, it's okay, and then you start to bring your legs up and everything just falls apart. And you have to be up there, like I said, pull yourself up, lift your legs. Not one time, but 100 times, because again, you don't know what's going to get wrong up there. You might get stuck up in the air, and you have to have enough muscular endurance to be able to hold you out there. So, as a female, what I think would be necessary or would be good for all medical departments to know is that first to educate women how you have to come back. And maybe not to rush them sometimes, maybe to really take a gradual approach to bring them back. Because there is a difference between walking and flying or going upside down and pressing up to handstands. Like all those things might be nonsense what I'm telling you, because this is not a part of your world, but this was hugely part of my world. And I saw that, and I'm seeing this, like sometimes artists come to me and saying I need help to now, because I'm a coach, but also went through this many different levels. And they ask me, can you help me to bring my pelvic floor back? Can you bring my core back? Because I think I'm doing the job, but I feel like I haven't recovered well, and I just jumped over the step, and I went to the next step. And then one more thing which I want to say is, it has to do with what Nathan was saying actually. From my studies in Ukraine, I graduated from National University of Sports and Physical Education, and here I did an ASM. So I do have a few different specializations. And what's interesting is that when I was studying the performance enhancement specialist course, I was really disappointed because it was all based on American football, baseball, basketball, maybe soccer. None of it goes upside down unless something goes wrong. And this is very different than what we do in circus or even in gymnastics. And people who come to work in circus, most of them, they don't come from American football or basketball or baseball. They come from different disciplines, right? What I just said, acrobatics, gymnastics, sometimes even skiing, but they don't go upside down, So I think it's a very limited as well preparation of coaches on what is required in circus world, who you're working with. It's a very different gang of people, really very different gang of people, but they're fun and they're very passionate about what they're doing. Sometimes they really need help. Sometimes those people do not have patience. I was one of the people who didn't have patience, like, I can do that. But now, of course, when I would go back, I would say, no, I need to have more preparation before I go on stage and do something like that. So, and also to remember, it's a very risky world. You can have fatal fall. You can have that. But this is to ensure that you have to be most prepared physically, mentally, strength, endurance. All of this is very important. And what I want to say? I want to say that I hope this world can, connect better. The medical world together with the circus world. This will ensure the longevity of artists and actually their life as it is. And at the same time, if you come to a doctor who actually has some knowledge of this, right away as a professional, you have respect for another professional and you open up and you trust this person, and trust is a very important thing, I think, in everything you do in personal life as well as in their professional life. So I would encourage from the bottom of my heart as a performer to have the medical professionals who really try to understand different disciplines of circus world and be more educated in that. And this is, I think, it's just going to open their horizon. Next time they're going to go see a circus show, like, oh, I know what this means. I know the name of this act. I'm one of them. I know that. So it's going to feel more personal. Well, that's basically what I wanted to bring up. Sometimes, I have so many stories from the years of the work. Like, if I just say the shows, like here I was doing all in love, and I did bring shows which was salted on all the shows, and Totem, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately it was closed. But during all this time, we encountered so many people, and wonderful PMAT people from all different countries, and they were actually, I had opening line, which I'm going to close with. And we had one PMAT person, he was actually a physical therapist from Australia, young guy, but so full of knowledge. You trust him so much, and it's very important as a performer to trust your PMAT person, because then you would come to this person with an issue at the start, not when you can't move anymore. And that PMAT physical therapist, he was saying that performance body is like a Formula One car. You have to treat it this way. You have to maintain it and fix it while it's running, not after it broke down. After it broke down, it's too late. So this is the way of longevity and the way of trust and the way of lasting long as a performer. Because for a lot of people, when they stop performing, it's actually, sometimes you stop performing not because you're ready mentally, but because your body gave up. And that's the worst. Because you don't know you're at the crossroads, you haven't finished yet what you've been doing before, but you cannot start anything else because mentally you're not ready for that. So I think it's important to help the person make the transition and to help the person last as long as they can in a good health and good spirit, rather than see them ending their career just because physically they cannot. So that's pretty much what I want to say. If you have any questions, please go ahead and ask them while I'm standing up here. If not, I'm just gonna... Anybody has questions? Please feel free to ask. Yes, sir.
What was your favorite role and show? What was your favorite role and show in your career?
Come on, I didn't expect this question from you. This is such a question.
Gotcha.
So cliche, because every show is different. You perform at a different age, a different time of your life, and I just came to Circus. I was a house job. I was doing a lot of different things. At the beginning, I had no idea what I was doing, but I was doing it because I was asked to do it. So I was learning a lot. Then when I was on Saltimbank, this was a touring show, this was the time when I was becoming an artist. Because it's very different when you perform here in a theater, you have a fourth wall. You don't really communicate with public so much. When you perform in a big top, you actually with them, there is no wall, you are surrounded by people and you become one of them. So it's a very interesting, different feeling. And then I came back to Laugh, and I was one of the most touching role in my life, because I was playing model John Lennon, who died in real life in the car crash. And the director of the show wanted to bring this scene alive. And when I was doing creation, I was the mother. My daughter was 1 year old at that time. And the scene I was doing on stage with her, I was rehearsing with her at home. So I would put her in the grip. I'm like, okay, I'm coming to you. I have to remember all these feelings, and I bring them back on stage. But my character dies every night, twice a night. That was nightmare. And after the show, I'm driving in the car. I'm like, oh my god, my character just died in the car crash. So I had to be. It was very bad. It was beautiful, especially we were working with Beatles people. Like I was getting notes from Yoko Ono, so this was very special, and it was a very special role. And I always had such a responsibility to deliver this role. And it's not about what you do in the air, but it's the feeling you give to people that they really feel the tragedy of it. And then my other show with Todd, I was performing with my husband in the show, and it was very interesting as well, because we had a beautiful team. We had a family performing this show, and again, you cherish it for different reasons. You cherish it for, like I was doing the aerial act as well with two other guys, and we had a small team, very intimate team, and I could bicker with them backstage, especially my husband. They go on stage and like, maybe it's all different, So it's really fun because you live. It's a different life. You live here. You live on the touring show. It's very rich as experience. And like I said, every show has different pluses, and every show I remember for different reasons. And then I came back to our show 19 years later. It was crazy. Like we had a meeting every week. There's a meeting, and then on this meeting they said, okay, this person came back after injury, this person came back after pregnancy, and announced me and said, and Alya comes back 19 years later. Some artists were just 19 years old. So I'm like, oh my god, what am I doing? So it was very interesting, but it was cool to come back and to finish this full circle of starting with O and 19 years later come back to that show. So I cannot say specifically which act I like more, which role. comes a different age, comes a different experience, and I think it's what I cherish each one. It's like I love reading, and it's like each book. I open the book, I finish to read, I put it back on the shelf, I don't throw it away, it's there. But you just have different chapters, different books actually.
Nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else?
One of the things I'm interested about, you kind of talk about this evolution and better understanding physical recovery and better understanding what you need to do as you went on in your career, how to better rehab and come back. I'm curious also about kind of the unseen, how you mentally had to learn to reapproach recovery and what had gone on, postpartum and being told that that first doctor obviously didn't have a very good emotional treatment for you.
Yeah, so coming back after injuries, after falls, after having children, mentally is difficult because you don't know if your body is going to fail on you again. Or if it's prepared, because if it fails on you again up there, you don't know if the second time you can go through this kind of stress again. So I think what helps is that knowing that you've done everything you could to prepare physically. If physically you are ready, then you can trust your mind is going to be prepared as well. One of the things, but it's more not for medical people, it's more for, I would address to artists themselves, is to respect each other's personal space. Because, like I said, we come from different nationalities, different superstitions. And I'm Ukrainian or Russian people, they are very superstitious. I remember one time I was already loading onto my straps to go from the grid up down to the stage. And again, I take this role very seriously, as was Julia and Mother John Lennon. I know I'm dying at the end of each scene. And I'm stepping in it, and my artist passes by, he tells me, don't go out there, you'll die. And I'm already there, and I froze, I literally froze. I was so mentally distressed, I was performing the act, my mind wasn't there, I was just saying to myself, hold on. And that's the worst feeling you can have going to perform. Because you cannot think how high you are, or if something's going to fall, you just have to think step by step, but think one step ahead. What you have to do physically. So mental preparedness is very important, and I think you cannot just go from the cafeteria go up on stage. So like what helped in, for example, on the touring show, we have backstage, and then we have pre-backstage, and then you have stage. So it's like you have backstage where everybody's warming up, and then you have a curtain, and then you have another small like hallway, like corridor, just very corridor, like a tunnel, and then you have another curtain. And you would see big guys, like Russian bar guys, porters, they are huge. And he would stand there and he would prepare himself, he would pray before going on stage, and then this is your first preparedness, getting ready. And then you cross that curtain, you go to the next one. And that's when like, okay, what I did myself, for me that helped me to prepare physically and mentally is I always had the same real warm-up routine right before going on stage. Because some people would laugh at it, but I don't care about them, because what happens is that if I know I do this movement, and then this movement, and this movement, my body and my mind get prepared again. Now I'm ready, because I've done everything, I've discovered, and I built this routine, not in one day, I built this routine in weeks, because I knew I need to do a little bit this, and fine-tuning. It's fine-tuning in everything. And this kind of fine-tuning right before stepping on stage, I think it's very important as an artist. Excuse me. Allergies are full on. Yeah, I hope I answered your question. Yeah, is there any other question?
So we've talked so far about how there's a disconnect often between the medical profession and the circus performers. But you also mentioned a physical therapist that seemed to really get it. Could you speak to the first time you encountered a medical professional that finally understood you, or that took you as more than just a patient trying to return to their hobby, and what that kind of experience was like, where you felt a little more understood?
I think it's about asking questions. I think if the medical professional is asking the right questions, or she's trying to ask the right questions. They're trying to understand what exactly you are doing. and how you're doing this. So they might not necessarily ask you to show it because you might be injured right there again. But I think it's about not just knowing that you have 10 minutes for each patient and you have to cross them off quickly to see another one, but actually take some time and to speak to this person. And that's how, when you start feeling, okay, you actually matter, or they do care. I think it's a question of care more, I would say. Sometimes I would actually encounter that because we traveled a lot with Circus, and we encountered different countries, like Australia was graded, maybe even Canada was graded. Like, I think maybe here I have seen medical doctors, and they've been already working with Circus for some time, so they were more aware, like, they had more experience of, unfortunately, more experience working with injured artists, but that's the, even when machines break, and we are human beings, we are breaking. You cannot, as much as you take care of yourself, you still break. So I think it's about, when you start to feel that they care about you, that's when you start to feel trust. That's when the trust starts to build. It's like roots start to connect. That's what I have to say. Anything else?
Hey, thank you. That was an awesome talk. Thank you. My question is, since you all, I totally see that analysis of being compared to Formula One, just top of your game, amazing athletes. Since there's been that gap in being able to find physicians or medical people that can help you all, I know you said you're a trainer now, so I understand how to go to the gym and do reps on a bench press or, whatever, different exercises. How do you guys compensate I don't know how to ask the question, how do you compensate that gap on your own? Because I'm thinking there's certain injuries you can't just say do a lateral raise or whatever, you got a bicep curl 3 sets of 10 to fix that. You guys have sort of had to figure out ways to doctor yourselves to fix it. Do you know what I'm saying? Because somebody else can't tell you how. Like, I'm wondering preventatively and also after the fact. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's, I think that's when you start to seek people. That's when you start to go on Facebook and say, hey, who knows a good trainer around here? Who knows a good doctor around here? So you start to ask other people who had injuries and who actually found someone who had helped them. And believe it or not, there are not so many people who are helpful. There are a lot of people who can show you how to do biceps curls, and let's pull down, but there are not many people who can connect the body the way we need it. Right? Because, for example, we do, just simplify, we do a lot of stuff upside down, so your body has to roll differently upside down. You work with people who are very flexible. You work with people who have to use the full range of motions, which is very different from normal people. And I think it's really about searching. It's a really like a big point, So you just try to find the people who know how to deal with them. Of course, in Circus you also have PMED team, and you have strength conditioning coaches, so it's their job as well to provide the care that an artist needs, and they do that. But sometimes people try to find on the outside something else, or somebody else who can help them. It's also, I think, it's important to understand that everybody's different. So maybe I speak to you, what I say makes sense to you, but I can speak to you, it won't make sense to you. So you find someone who actually is in the same wave as you are. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think it's also studies, experience, wanting to know more, wanting to learn more, and to see how else you can help yourself. Maybe not going traditional way, but doing something else, doing other classes and this kind of stuff. Of course, Pilates is a great thing. You have the normal workouts. You have Pilates, you have yoga, you have all kind of different things that might speak to other ones. Some people, some don't. And I think it's about educating also artists that it's not only about, you'll be surprised how not much artists know about physical preparedness. They wouldn't know, like, you have to be strong, they just go straight training, but they don't do much of flexibility, much of mobility, much of self-myofascial release. All of those components, they actually do help to prepare you in full range. So I think proper education is going to be the one that would help people in general. Anything else?
We have time for one more question. We're going to do one last question, and then we will have breaks. And so if anyone else has questions, we will have breaks where you can go and ask people.
So that story you told about meeting that doctor who put his hand, her hand behind and said, "I don't know what to do if you've ever seen anything like this." It didn't sound like it left a positive impression on you. What would you have preferred him or her say instead?
That's a good question. I want you to help me.
Well-
that's why I go to the doctor and you ask for help.
Well, from my perspective, it wouldn't have been better if they had lied to you and said, "I could probably do this," and then they don't know what they're doing.
You might be right. You're probably right from the doctor point of view, but that's the gap. That's the gap we're talking about, that you ask for help and the help is not there. So I don't know, it's as much as we have to educate ourselves, that's probably people who want to help, need to educate themselves too. So I don't have an answer for you on that, because I come there with the urgent need of help, and this help is not there. So maybe they need to, of course I can't tell you what to do, but they need to have doctors who don't know, how can I say it? If he's a young, probably doctor has experience, but he will not know all those things. But quite often you go just to a regular doctor and they have to type in the computer, in a Safari, to search what this diagnosis means, and then they see what it comes, what it shows on there, and there's a medicine they give you. I think there's a gap. There's a gap of maybe not enough knowledge from the medical department. So I don't have an answer for you. I don't. I just need help. I want help. Put my ring back and let me go perform back on stage. All right, that's probably it. So thank you.
We're going to just take 1 second as we switch over some computers. And I think that last question is a perfect segue into one of the big problems that we have is there isn't a lot of knowledge about this. There isn't a lot of knowledge of how to treat performers, but some of the stuff that we can do is the stuff that we have kind of scheduled for the rest of the evening, which is, one, we can all try and learn a little bit more. We can all learn from the artists. We can all learn from each other on how we can better take care of these artists. So without further ado, I will introduce one of our physicians, Dr. Erickson, who is going to come and teach us a little bit about women's health and some stuff as providers we might not necessarily be able to do, but we know we have resources of where to send people. If we don't necessarily know the answer, we will have people to send them to who can have the answer. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Erickson.
This is so delighted actually to be here and be a part of this. I love the diversity that, not only language diversity, but diversity in culture and experience. And it is just so fun to be here. I'm so excited. So I started my career like 1,000 years ago. I mean, literally 40 years ago, I started as a regular obstetrician gynecologist and delivered about 5,000 babies in the first 20 years of my career. And have seen all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I decided, I wanted to help all of the poor women that I had injured as we went through their labor and delivery experience, as they literally walked through the valley of the shadow of death. The closest you will come to death is probably falling from one of your places. The second closest is going to be having a baby. That's where the risks are there. So the last 20 years, I have been a reconstructive pelvic surgeon. So I'm the person that fixes all of the bad things that happen to women, for either from childbirth or when I'm in Africa fixing fistulas and prolapse and incontinence and genital mutilation and all the crazy things that happen. Sometimes they end up in my office and I have the chance to do that. So I can't say that I understand your pain in the sense of falling from one of your trapeze, but I do understand your orthopedic pain. 3 years ago, I'm a private pilot. 3 years ago, I was taking off from Ogden, Utah to fly back here to Las Vegas. And when my plane got in the air, I lost power, so I crashed. 3 months in the hospital, literally broke everything. Compound fractures in both legs, 13 vertebral fractures, 5 ribs on the right, 7 on the left, bleed into my brain, bleed into my spine, and surgery after surgery after surgery. So I understand your orthopedic trauma, and so I truly feel for you when you get injured and you wonder, how am I going to get back to work? The hospital said, I do all my surgery sitting down. That's what I do as a urogynecologist, and I dance. I love to dance. I dance with the robot every single day. I'm over in the corner manipulating my hands, and these crazy machines are inside of this woman's body doing delicate things, and when you looked at that 20 years ago, it's like, what are we going to be doing? But it's that dance that you do every single day, and I appreciate that dance. And I think that there are physicians out there and there are providers, and you just need to spend the time to try to put them together. But you do deserve the respect that you should have for the incredible things that you do. And it takes a long time to train. It took me 90 minutes, an hour and a half to do my first cesarean section. I was an intern. I was at the University of Colorado. It took 5 minutes to get the baby out. Thank goodness it was an elective cesarean section and not an emergency section. Well, years later, and after many experiences and practice, under emergent conditions, I was able to deliver a baby in 9 seconds and have the uterus and everything closed in 19 minutes. So those professional experiences take time. And that's what you do every day. It's painful, and you do it, and you do it. And we need to appreciate that. So I've been asked to talk primarily about stress incontinence. So you might say, oh my goodness, what's happening in the operating room about this? And now these pictures they're just sort of drawings and diagrams, but this is a side view of a woman. And so there are 2 basic organ structures that keep the urine from coming out when it's not supposed to. And the first one is this sort of hammock. Imagine that the pelvic bone is hollow. If you look at it, there's nothing else there. Well, what prevents your guts from falling on the ground? It's a hammock of muscle. And there are muscles that go from all the bones, and they come in, and there's 3 little openings through that musculature. 1, the urethra, where the urine comes out. 2, the vagina, where babies come out. And 3, the rectum, where we complete our defecation. So what happens over time with pregnancy, which is the biggest risk factor for stress incontinence, is those muscles stretch. And as they stretch, and then a baby's head that's this big comes down there, barely fits through the pelvis, you can imagine the traumas that happen to those poor little muscles. So then you get done and you go back and the doctor says, well, you need to do Kegels. And I can't tell you how many of my patients come in and say, I've been Kegels for 2 years, and I put my finger in the vagina, I say, do a Kegel, and they're tightening their butt, they're tightening their ankles, they're tightening their eyeballs, and they're squeezing the wrong muscles. So I want each of you to try this. I want you to imagine there's a little, even the men, there's a little round rubber ball at the opening of your vagina, and you're going to try to suck it up in the vagina. Squeeze that little teeny muscle. It's not your butt, it's that little teeny muscle right there in the center. That's a tiny muscle. We have to exercise tiny muscles all the time. If you're doing weight training, you do the big groups a couple times a week, but when you're doing Kegels, because it's the little teeny muscle, you have to set alarms on your alarm clock because nobody remembers to do them. I used to say when you stop at a stoplight when there's a commercial on TV, well now we never watch TV, and we're doing other things. We don't even look at the stoplight, we just drive right through because we're looking at our phone. So put an alarm at 8 in the morning, at noon, 4 in the afternoon, and 8 at night with your Kegel ringtone. So only you know when it goes off, and do 10 of them. 10 reps, 4 sets a day, for the rest of your life. And that will help. Unfortunately, when the muscle has sagged so much, when this tissue starts hanging out, then you cannot rescue it. So then you have to start, well, what else can I do? So the muscles are one of the variables that control it. Then right here, though, there's something else. There's something called this pubourethral ligament. We didn't even know this until the mid-90s. They did MRIs. We didn't know actually, what prevents the urine from just falling out all the time. Well, if this is your urethra, there's this little sort of a natural hammock sling that goes around and attaches to the pubic bone. And so when you increase intra-abdominal pressure, that pressure pushes against the bladder, and that can be a cough, a sneeze, it can be all of your acrobatics, any of the aerial things that you're doing where you have to tighten your core, you're increasing pressure inside your belly, and that pressure wants to go somewhere. It can come out your belly button, that's called an umbilical hernia. It can come out your groin, that are groin hernias. For women, it can come out your vagina, and that's a vaginal hernia. That ligament will stretch, and unfortunately when that stretches, the urine will come out. Anytime you have some kind of increased intra-abdominal pressure event, and that little hammock is gone, you're going to leak. Not only is it embarrassing, it's actually very difficult to do the things that you do. So you don't even talk about it. There's 200 million women, 25% of women suffer from urinary stress incontinence. We're not treating hardly any of them. It's because it's not a conversation that you're going to have over the dinner table with very many people. And that trust that you were talking about with your physician. I'm a guy. It takes a long time for women to look and say, am I really going to talk to Ty and tell him what my problems are? Well, if we create that kind of relationship, the answer is yes. So, you've got the ligament. If that's stretched, it has to be replaced. We'll talk about that. Or you've got the muscle. So you can do the muscle thing, start them now for the rest of your life. But what happens when, okay, now we're at the point where I'm leaking and I have to find a solution. So we're going to talk about some non-surgical things that have been validated in good studies that you can do that are pretty easy to acquire. You may have heard of some of these, but I just want to kind of assure you what works and what doesn't. So let's first look at how your body works and what is that mechanism. This is a side view MRI, magnetic resonant image, and what it shows is here's the uterus, this is the pubic bone, here's the bladder, and then underneath these other structures, the urethra comes down. This little blue thing there is that ligament we're talking about. And then there's the muscles, which is this kind of gray, that forms like a butterfly as it curves around the vagina. And then we have this called fascia, this sort of like connective tissue that's there. This is normal. This is a woman who's had multiple children. There is no longer any support to that urethra. So when there's increased abdominal pressure, the bladder will rotate down, that's kind of prolapse, and the urine will leak out. Well, what do we do? Well, in the 1700s in Europe, they would take a pomegranate, seriously, and then they would put some wax on it, and they would push the pomegranate up inside the vagina, and that would kind of put some pressure on things and prevent it from falling out. I raised my children in Idaho, and I still have a practice there. In fact, I'm flying there this afternoon. And 100 years ago, we were using potatoes, and they would put a potato up in there to kind of hold things. Well, we have better options than potatoes and pomegranate. So there are things called pessary. Now, pessary is some sort of device that is placed into the vagina with some mechanism that puts a little bit of pressure underneath the urethra to try to mimic what that ligament used to do. So these are temporary. You put them in when you're doing your activity. When you're done with your activity, you can pull them out. This one is called Revive. It's placed in with a tampon-like device. So this is kind of like a piece of plastic that collapses. You push in, you pop it up, and it has this little compression portion of this piece of plastic. If the urethra is right here, that kind of pops up and puts a little bit of pressure. So when there's an increased intra-abdominal vent, you don't leak. Then there are ring pessaries. Now what a ring pessary, this looks like a torture device, okay? It's not a trouble. Well, what it is, it's a little, sort of like a donut, and you fold it, and then you push that donut up inside, and what it does is it's in the vagina, and that little ring part actually will create a pressure gradient against the urethra. Now there are different sizes, so someone would have to fit you for them, but these can be reused. So you can get one, you can use it day after day after day. You put it in for however many hours you're doing your little workout, your incredibly artistic stuff, and then when you're done, you pull it out. So sometimes you have to get the right size, maybe it's a little too tight, maybe it's too loose, we can find that. So ring pessary, this is what one looks like, and this is kind of an example. It's placed in the vagina, and you place it, right? So it's not, oh my goodness, I gotta go to the doctor to get it replaced. I do have some women who are in nursing homes where they'll leave it in for a month, and then they'll come and we'll take it out, wash it, and put it in. So you can leave it in for an extended period of time. But I usually say after 24 hours, take it out, wash it, and they can be reused when you need to do it. So ring pessary is an option. Now this one is interesting. This is called Uresta, and they've actually done studies. Ring pessary, they've actually done studies. So these are legitimately well documented, reasonably effective. Okay, people's satisfaction rates range between 75 and 92%, depending upon their comfort level in getting them. But the efficacy, their ability to do this. This one, you basically hold on to this and you push this up inside, and now it has this little bit of a ring, and there are multiple sizes of this. Fairly easy to put in. It's a little easier to put this in than to kind of fold the donut, because when I'm teaching women, they fold it and fling it across the floor, down to the ground. And who knows what bacteria is on my ground, so we got to get it up, torch it with some sterilizing equipment, and then they try it again. But essentially, this is placed up inside. So you have the normal urethra with the support. When you've lost the support, the urine comes out. You put this device in, and it just increases that pressure gradient against the urethra, so that you can go ahead and do all of your activities as needed. Again, you may need to come back, do some adjustments to find out how that works. Now, these are disposable over the counter. There is $2 billion a year spent in adult women diapers for stress incontinence. $2 billion. So the companies, they love disposable things because that's how they make their money, right? So this one actually works very, very well. This is a tampon-based system. You can't use a regular tampon. I have patients come in and say, well, can't I just put a tampon up there? Yes, but you'd have to fold it like sort of like origami to get it into the right form that it can put some pressure. So a regular tampon isn't meant for that. But this is made out of the same tampon-like material. In fact, it's produced by the same company that makes tampons, right? They're going to monetize their way what they can do. But it looks like kind of this sort of square box, small, larger box than the other. It's placed in through this sort of an inserter, and when it's put in, this section right here is right underneath the urethra, so you get that same sort of effect of pressure against the urethra that allows you to leave that in, and then these need to be disposed probably within 8 hours, because you don't want to leave something that could get bacteria and things like that. The others you can take out, wash, and then reuse them. This one needs to be disposed. And there are 3 sizes, right? And you literally can go to the store. Right now, you can go online and you can order from Amazon, and you get toys and pressa. You can send them out, you can play with them and see how they work. These are relatively effective, and they actually do quite a nice job. And so what they do is, here's that urethra, the ligament used to be here, it's been stretched out and it's sagging, so now you can go in and you place this and it puts that pressure into that area. Well then, what's the option that I do as a surgeon? Okay, so if you say, well, you know, Ty, I've tried everything, and yeah, I mean, I've had 19 children, and guess what? I just am not, these things aren't going to fit anymore, so what do I do? Well, we can replace the ligament. So if you think about orthopedic surgery, so my wife had a horrific accident, it's had both shoulders replaced. You can put metal in, and you can put tendons and all kinds of things to reconstruct some sort of a structure. So this little teeny urethral ligament can be fixed with what is called a sling. Now, talk to the lawyers and they'll have all kinds of things that they want to talk about, but let's put that aside. Done appropriately by a surgeon that knows what they're doing, replacing this is very effective. Now, the first one that came out was in the 90s by Dr. Hollister out of Sweden, actually. These were what we call retropubic slings. So, you're asleep, and it's an outpatient procedure, and we go in with this sort of like a curved trocar needle, and we go behind the pubic bone, and then we create this hammock of this mesh material. It's about a ½ inch, and that's probably about 10 inches long, and then that stays in place, and it sits underneath the urethra, so if you cough or sneeze, it creates this kinking mechanism. The data has shown that that's 90% effective and works for a long period of time. So they follow some of those patients out more than 19 years. But it is kind of an aggressive procedure, so they've looked at alternatives. So the one that I currently use is what's called a mini sling. This is a single incision, so we make a little teeny incision inside of the vagina, right at that middle part of the urethra, about 2 centimeters, which is just a little less than an inch. The sling is 2.5 inches by ½ inch. It has 2 tiny little anchors that we go out to the little membrane, and we literally replicate that sling, close up the incision, and then the patients are able to do things. First question people ask is, well, is it safe? Answer, all procedures have risks, but I did 4 of them this week. This is a relatively safe procedure. It works well. So the next question is, well, how long do I have to be out of work? Well, I was interestingly asked by the government of Saudi Arabia about 15 years ago to go there and teach their surgeons how to do these mini slings, because since it is same-day outpatient, women could discreetly, without telling their significant other, that they were having a problem, because that is a problem in some of the cultures in terms of their definition of cleanliness. They could go in, put this little sling in, they could go back, and no one would know the difference. And so in that culture, it was very important for the discreet and privacy to be able to do this. These things work immediately. A couple of months ago, I had a patient, she came in, tearfully explaining that she loves to run marathons. So she wears black marathon shorts, and before she runs, she gets a bottle of water, and she would squirt it all over her so that her shorts would be wet, so that every time she's bouncing for however many miles she's running and leaking a little bit, she doesn't have to feel embarrassed. I did her on Tuesday. The next week, she ran a half marathon, came back and hugged me because she didn't have to squirt herself with water because it was working quite well. So those are your options, right? You have non-surgical options that are very, very effective. The whole concept of, well, you can't Kegel yourself back into completely there, so Kegel is more of a preventive thing to do, but it isn't going to rescue you if that ligament has been torn. But what I want you to understand is there are things out there. I'm just talking about one thing. There are orthopedists and there are people that can actually, if they listen to you, if they create that relationship where they understand what your concerns are and spend the time with you, most things have some reasonable solution that they can do. So with that, I'll open it up to some questions that you might have. This was like the highlight, right? I mean, 30 years and you get Dr. Erickson in 10 minutes. I am impressed with what you guys do. Seriously, it's unbelievable.
Thank you for the information. Talking about the pelvic floor, I did a course, I took a course on the pelvic floor from a physical therapist. And then they spoke about pelvic floor physical therapy. So not many women know about it. And since I took it in the course, I decided to ask my gynecologist. I wanted to go experience and talk to the person who was actually doing this therapy. And I thought it was amazing and very helpful. So I think there's a lack of information for women out there that there is this kind of maybe specialization of pelvic floor physical therapy. Because we're also talking about muscles, and muscle has to breathe, has to relax and contract. So it's not just about doing Kegels all the time, as you said. You need to learn other techniques. And what's interesting is that I thought this physical therapy showed so many different, good exercises and how to help yourself without doing any surgeries, without going that path. So maybe this kind of information has to be passed around more, and women have to be more educated. When you talk about Circus, maybe there must be this option as well, not just to see a regular physical therapy, but actually pelvic floor physical therapy.
And she's right. That's a subspecialty physical therapy, right? So you're not going to go to the orthopedic physical therapist and do that. Although they may have started out as an orthopedic physical therapist, but now they actually are doing this very, very specific. And there are at least 3 main muscles in there, but the way that they need to be adjusted and trained and taught, you do need to have someone that really knows what they're doing. It's an excellent point. Yes, other question.
I work as
You don't want to be looking at that picture all the time. So I'm willing to put one of my emails up there because I know there are people that are embarrassed. I don't mind taking emails. If you have any questions, feel free to send me. I may not respond immediately, but I will. I will respond. So that is my email address. And seriously, so why is he giving his email address? Because you know what? When I was hurting and I couldn't get a hold of my doctor, it's horrible. It's horrible. So anytime you got a question, feel free to shoot me a message. Other questions that you may have?
I work as a male coach for a gymnastics trampoline team with female athletes. And I have athletes where daily they need to use the bathroom after bouncing. They've got 10 to 15 Gs repeatedly. They're getting back pressure. I have, until now, avoided, it's not really something I can talk about, especially in gymnastics. It's very touchy to the approaching such discussions with female athletes. Sometimes I have female coaches that I can turn to ask to pass on information. What would you recommend in, as a man, having these sort of needing to know this information and how to communicate it without, making women and young girls, feel uncomfortable?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and there's to answer is twofold. One is make sure that you, when you're having a conversation, that it's done in an appropriate manner, but it's also done with some information that you're going to be able to convey to them. So you don't want to ask them what their problem is, because if you can't do something about their problem, they're just going to be embarrassed to have a conversation. So I encourage the male trainers, the male athletes, to go and study it and learn, because those questions will come up, and you should be able to at least guide those female clients to somebody who can actually do something to help them. And the second is that it's important for all of us to be a little bit more open with our needs, because if you're suffering in silence, I can't tell you how many women come in and I just go, man, why didn't you come in a long time ago? We can actually help do things sooner. So physical therapists, get to them sooner, right? Don't wait until it's so bad. Use some of these other products, see what's out there. Avoid surgery if you can. I mean, I'm as busy a surgeon as I want to be. So try to find things that you can do, both in terms of your communication skills, but your knowledge base, to be able to find out. And research. You can find people in Las Vegas. There are physical therapists here, I'm sure, that if you just spend a little time calling around, you can get some information. There's also a lot of charlatans out there, so just be really careful that you're not getting taken in. So, other questions? Yes.
Thank you for your talk. 2 questions. First off, I'm a physician, and I understand when I try to educate my patients, there's a lot of options out there, and you talked about the different inserts. Can you give a ranking in your experience of, because I know everybody's body is different, and so certain tampons fit better people different ways, things like that. In your experience, if you had to rank those for these super athletes, start with this. If this doesn't work, try this next. Try this next.
Yeah.
This is the old faithful one that usually most of my people have most success with. That's the first question. And secondly, we're familiar with elective versus required surgeries. So you talk about that sling that you do outpatient. I grew up in Saudi Arabia, so I thought that was really interesting. You talked about that. I understand that culture and how there's so many, it's like walking, it's like tactics through a minefield. You gotta be careful, because that can cause a lot of problems for women with those issues. But my question is that an elective surgery for these athletes to be aware of, or do they have to do certain things first to qualify? Because I know if I have a patient come in with an injury, they have to do an x-ray, then they have to do CT, then an MRI, then they can talk to the surgeon. So if they don't understand that, can you talk about that, please?
Sure. So in answer to your first question, the little ring pessary that looks like a ring, like literally like a ring that you put on your finger, that probably appropriately fitted. That's probably the most economical and effective method in terms of using that. And I would suggest that would be the way to go, because in your profession, it's not like you're a weekend warrior and you're going to need something like the disposable item that we showed. That's for people that occasionally are having a problem. But if day in and day out you're doing something, then I would suggest a ring pessary. And then the other inserts that are made out of plastic, each one of them may have a different comfort level. So you find, well, what's comfortable? The second question is excellent. Stress incontinence is a legitimate diagnosis. It is not elective. Every insurance covers it, Medicare, Medicaid. There is a little bit of workup. You have to, one, make sure that there's not a neurological problem that's causing incontinence. There is overflow incontinence. So it's very simple. What I do in my office is I check their residual. I find out how much, when they empty their bladder, are they emptying their bladder? So if they're not, then I have to start thinking about multiple sclerosis and all kinds of things. So that's a very simple thing. We have them come in, empty their bladder, put a little catheter in, and then I fill their bladder up, and then I verify. I have to verify and document that they leak. It's not that hard to do that. I have them cough. I always put a little something up. I have them cough. If they don't leak sitting down, I have them stand up. So one is make sure they're emptying their bladder. 2, verifying that they're leaking. And the final thing is just basically verifying that they can safely have the procedure done and be able to tolerate a light anesthetic. But insurance companies, all you have to do is prove that they can empty the bladder and prove that they leak urine. You don't have to do any fancy. I do urodynamics, I have all this expensive equipment, but those are for the really, really complicated patients.
And to tag on, what is the average turnaround time of recovery? Because recovery matters to these athletes.
Yeah, so I do not, after I do this procedure, I do not restrict them from anything but no sexual activity for 3 weeks. So for the activities that you do, I would not restrict you. Interestingly, the only patient I've restricted was the Idaho deadlifting champion. I said, honey, you gotta go 6 weeks before you're doing the weights. But even though you're talking about these G's, there's not that, the pressure gradient of straining is not gonna cause this sling to come undone and come out. Now most surgeons will say 4 to 6 weeks, but we ran the numbers and you do not have to wait that time. This thing is anchored into the tendon and it's gonna be effective immediately.
One more question.
Yeah.
Do you ever have to get tuned up, tweaked, like replaced? Like pacing?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so like, what's the revision rate? What she's asking. So I have published multiple articles on the particular thing that I use. In fact, I sent one in this morning, last week, in peer-reviewed journals. We published our 3-year data, and it was a comparative trial of mini sling versus full-length slings. So I'm telling people at least 10 years, because that's how long I've tracked my patients. I tell them it's probably not going to be for life, but it's easy. I just, like today, this week I had a patient, took one out that had been put in 2007, took it out, put in a new one. So it's not a big deal to actually replace. But I would say at least 10 years, probably longer. I just don't have my data for more than 10 years.
We've got time for one last question.
Thank you for your talk. It was very instructive. But I would like to bring it back a little bit to the circus environment and context. I know you talked a lot about weakening and weak muscles that cause this urinary incontinence, but there is some research, especially with trampoline athletes, that show that the problem is tightness and not weakness, which is also related to the first question. So I'd like to ask, how do you approach, first of all, understanding these different scenarios, how artists sometimes will have not a weakness problem, but a tightness problem of the pelvic floor, and also how do you educate and spread this type of information? Because me not being a medical professional, when I try to talk with people about this, they usually get very skeptical. They don't believe it can be tight. If it's leaking, it's loose, but yeah, there's been some...
That's an very good question. So what she's saying is that the dynamics that occur in these muscles and these ligaments is not just a one-story saga. So on physical examination, an experienced gynecologist can palpate all of those muscle groups, and we know immediately whether are too tight and whether are too loose. So it's very easy. You don't have to have an MRI, you don't have to have a CAT scan or some drink this white chalk that you have to then pee out and see what happens. Very, very simply on a pelvic examination. But that's a good point. Now the physical therapist, once they start working with you, they're good at treating both of them. So they can help those muscles relax. Most of my women who come in with the tight muscles also have a fair amount of pelvic pain. So the physical therapy not only helps their continence issues, it does a significant thing in improving the pain that they're having. Thank you, and I hope that you just be safe.
And we are going to switch over laptops one more time. So we're going to welcome our next speaker to the stage, who is going to be Dr. Verchinin. She spoke last year about her work with some of the special forces, and we are so lucky to have her again this year to speak again. So if we can all just welcome Dr. Verchinin, I will let her introduce herself here.
So last year when we talked about meeting them in the middle, the high performance athletes, and blending what we call good medicine, take 6 weeks off for this injury, with the warrior mindset that goes along with all these high performance athletes. So these are the types of athletes that I work with. It's a little bit different, and I know you were saying comparing sports athletes, or nobody seems too upset with me last year when we were talking about the operational athletes compared to our circus and athletic performers. So what we're going to talk about this week, we're sticking to women's health, sorry guys, for a minute. We're talking about pregnancy and high performance athlete. And Alya did a great job from her own experience telling you that she went far above and beyond anything that I have experience with. But my normal Air Force disclaimer, the Air Force has no input or responsibility for anything that I'm about to tell you. So this is my personal experience. What happens when you take an operational athlete or a high performance athlete in the circus world and insert baby? I am not an OB-GYN. I am not experienced like Dr. Erickson and some of the ins and outs of all the having a baby things. But I did have to take my world and my job and try to figure out how to include a tiny human in that, and what I was and wasn't allowed to do. So I spent the last year and a half from my life trying to figure out how to blend those two things. The most important thing is exactly why we're here, right? Finding the right person to ask. Alya, highlighted exactly the right question, like, who do you talk to? Where do you go? And that is why we're here. That's why we're having this conference, and it was so that we can bring together a like-minded community, from the circus community to the leadership of the performances to the medical community, and find the people who have a passion for this type of medicine to be able to give them some place to go to ask these questions. Should I be 32 weeks? Can I be 32 weeks? Because I wanted to be out there doing my job. I love what I do. I carry a 50-pound backpack combined with body armor, helmet, plates. Comes out to be about 90 pounds of gear, plus or minus the dude on the stretcher that I'm supposed to carry. Like, can I do that? I don't know. I asked my command and my flight doc, and their answer was like, yeah. So trying to find the person that you can come to ask those questions to get a realistic perspective, right? There's no easy answer to, can I do, tricks is not the right word, but can I do different things on a trampoline? Can I be on a rope? Can I, can I spin? Can I bounce? What types of things are safe for a baby? The short answer is, we don't have a lot of data to say what you can or can't do, but having someone that understands what you do and can have a conversation, that's where we're starting, and that's why we're having this. That's why Nate and Scott have put all this together, so that we can have those conversations. Something to keep in mind is that there is a 15 to 20% miscarriage rate no matter what you do. If you are the person who sits on a couch, you don't expose you or baby to anything outside, you don't do anything risky, you still have a possibility that something could go wrong. So how do you blend that with knowing what you want to do, what you love to do, and what you should do? It really comes down to informed and shared decision making. My husband is an operator, so he and I sat down together and we said, what can we do? I went to the flight doc, they said, you don't know. So I looked up the Air Force's protocols, and they have a program called Fit to Fly. So for pilots, even fighter pilots, people that are air crew that fly on a regular basis, you are allowed to fly between to say, hey, can I still do these things? The American College of Gynecology, Obstetrics and Gynecology has started to push out some literature, and Dr. Erickson mentioned some of the things that he's written. They're trying to tell us where are our right and left boundaries. My best thoughts for myself actually came out of some of the European literature. They have a little bit different perspective on health and wellness, and that like mindfulness mindset, getting out, doing more, being more active, being more proactive. And I found some retroactive studies. What that means is like they've done the surveys, like what Nate did for the athletes, and said, what did you do? How did it work? What was the outcomes? And it found that most of the things that you do pre-pregnancy, if you're feeling good while you're doing them, you can do during pregnancy. So I would say that you as the athletes, you know your bodies, you know what you do, you know what happens when you land on a trampoline and that cushions the impact, or it doesn't. And you also know what things go wrong. I can't sit here as a physician and tell you what happens when you fall off of something, what happens when you end up with medical complications because you double bounce on a trampoline and something goes wrong. How often does that happen to you? Those are the conversations that I, as a medical provider, would have with you when you're trying to decide what you would or wouldn't want to do. Is like, I rode my horse until I was 32 weeks pregnant. I have a nice, calm, sane horse. I stopped jumping, and we stayed on the ground, and I did what I loved to do, because in the entire 12 years that I've owned that horse, I've fallen off once. Could I get in a car wreck? Could I trip over my feet? Yes, I could. Could I fall off that horse? Could something catastrophic happen? I could, but once in 15 years, I was willing to live with something that I was passionate about, but also did come with some risk. The picture down here in the middle is actually me at EDC. I was working 38 weeks pregnant at what is one of the biggest shows, non-athletic shows, and they were like, you will not deliver a baby at EDC. I was like, I will not deliver a baby at EDC. But I also can see Nellis from the top of the grandstands. So, but it was something that I was passionate about. It's what I love to do. And I was also at a different place, not that particular moment, helping with a patient who had used some different substances. And I was holding them while my pregnant belly was going this way because someone was bending an arm in the wrong direction. And I was like, this is not the way we hold patients. So let me do this thing. What you love to do matters. What you want to do with your life matters, and trying to blend that with pregnancy and find a way to do what is safe for you, safe for baby, and keeps you doing the things that make you mentally and physically happy and healthy is important. Some things that I found that were speed bumps, and some things that are definitely hard stops in pregnancy. So everyone talks about morning sickness, right? And you can throw up. How does that affect a high performance athlete? One, nutrition matters a lot in what you do. Also, physically, you probably don't have the reserves of extra layers to give you a cushion in your calorie intake. You know, when you are throwing up and you're not able to keep anything down, you're losing muscle mass, you're losing your ability to compensate your electrolytes as well. So that matters, and is also something that needs to be looked at and addressed as you're going through. The thing that really impacted me with doing my job, and is something to consider as you're going through this pregnancy process, was fatigue. between 8 and 14 weeks of pregnancy in that early stage, I was so tired. I was sleeping like 10 hours a day and then taking a 3-hour nap in the afternoon, and I felt like a toddler. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sleeping so much. I think there's a reason why the military's protocols go from 12 to 26 weeks. You can do your job, and that is because that early portion of pregnancy does have the morning sickness. It does come with a different amount of fatigue. And when you're talking to a person about dealing with pregnancy and a performance athlete, it might be important to caution them that there's portions of pregnancy where you will be better and less capable of doing your job. Obviously, hard stops, things like bleeding, high-risk pregnancies, and then you have to decide for yourself what portion of what you're wanting to do is going to be most important to you. Something in the performance and circus community that's really important is going to be planning ahead. When Nate did those surveys, 70% said they had insurance. But what does insurance look like? Does that mean that you have full coverage and everything's great? Does that mean you have disaster insurance that is only going to cover things that are catastrophic? Or does that mean that you do not have anything at all? What happens if throughout your pregnancy something isn't as straightforward as we all hope it is, and you end up on bed rest? I actually met Dr. Erickson through a referral from the military when I ended up having to have a postpartum surgery myself. I went to Dr. Erickson and I said, I cannot do my job if my baby is trying to make my insides the outsides. So those are complicating factors that you have to consider. If I can't continue to do my job, if I can't continue to do what I love, how am I going to balance that? Am I a 1099 contractor who's paid by the show? What happens if I have to take those weeks off? What happens if the baby is in the NICU afterwards? I can't guide you through those, but as a provider who's working with you, those are things that I would want to talk about. What does plan A, B, and C look like? Coming back from this, one of the things that I think postpartum we don't talk about enough. Everybody wants to help you while you're pregnant. They're like, oh, okay, let's take care of you, let's take care of baby. Baby comes out, and they're just like, cool, have a nice day. Like, go do your things. It really doesn't work like that, and postpartum care is one of the areas where across all of medicine we are often lacking. It's being looked at now, and we're starting to build a good postpartum community, but it is something that in the past has not been addressed nearly enough. My recommendation is to give yourself a little bit of grace. You're going to want to be back to doing exactly what you do. I worked so hard through my whole pregnancy. I carried my backpacks. I did my training. I was ready. And what it actually did was make my ab muscles really tight, hold my daughter in, and shove her down in my pelvis so that when she was down there, she's stretching out all those nice ligaments that Dr. Erickson was talking about. So 38 weeks, I was still hiking, I was still doing my things, I did everything that I could do, and then I had a baby, and then I had 2 surgeries. So mental preparation, like Alya said, that mindset of what you are or not going to think or feel afterwards, and telling yourself that there are going to be different pathways as you come through this are really important to tell yourself ahead of time. One of my really good friends here in town actually has a psychology practice that she focuses on postpartum stress, anxiety, and depression for mothers. She had a completely different psychology practice until her 3rd child, when she went through some pretty severe postpartum depression herself, and she realized that that is an incredibly underserved area of our community. As a high-performance athlete, the mindset is incredibly important in recognizing that this is going to create a transition period where hormones change, your sleep changes drastically. My daughter does not sleep since she was born, like at any given time. Usually it's in the 4 to 5 range in the last few months. Prolonged sleep deprivation is a level of stress that most people do not anticipate. I think only moms can tell you that 6 months of having 4 hours of sleep a night is a completely different thing for your mental health. Some of the frustrations that you feel over not being able to perform instantaneously at your previous level. You want to get out, like in your heart and in your head, you are able to do all of those things, and giving yourself the grace to work back up to that is challenging. Facing some of the actual muscular dysfunction, so as you have baby, your abdominal wall stretches. The muscles can be worked with, just in the same preparatory things that Dr. Erickson was talking about with Kegels. But you also have a fascial layer in there, and that stretches, and that doesn't necessarily go right back together. And sometimes that actually requires repair as well. Pelvic floor dysfunction, I do Kegels, lots of Kegels, all the time. Had alarms set, had everything. Something else that was challenging that I didn't think through, even as a physician, we don't know all of this. One of the things that Alya was talking about is, coming to a physician and having them say, I don't know. I do respect the person that says, I don't know. I do hope that all of us are learning and developing to know more. What I think this takes is knowing, like Dr. Erickson, where to go, who to go to, and that's what we're hoping to come out of this, is a list of people in Las Vegas, in this community, who say, I really want to work in the performance industry. I want to learn more about these things. I want to be the person, you said you went to Concentra. I would probably never, I don't know, to an urgent care. So it's not a Concentra, I'm not a, please don't shoot me, for anybody who's watching. But urgent care providers is probably not the person who's going to have a really large awareness of what you do. So at the very least, having a physical therapist or a coach or a physician who understands who you are and what you do, go to that hospital with you and speak the same language and speak your language, and just in the same way that we have a translator in a hospital for people who speak a language that doesn't come naturally to any of the rest of us, you have a person who is able to communicate on your behalf. Those types of things are what we're hoping to build out of this, so that when there is a problem, when there is an injury, you have a person who speaks the medical language and who speaks the circus language and who can help you blend those two to find the right solution. Breastfeeding, trying to do that in the operational world. I have literally been pumping while my team is setting up to load a patient into a helicopter, and I have run out there, thrown on my gear, and started loading that patient into the helicopter with all of my gear on, and then come back and sat down and pumped again. It's a preparation that you don't think that you're going to have to do, but 3 hours goes by really fast. And when you have to sit down and think about how to plan that around your training, how to plan that around your performances, and how to get that milk back to baby, because my husband is sitting there dutifully while I'm doing a trauma shift this week, and we had 20 patients roll in about an hour and a half, and I'm like, hey, I'm not coming home for a hot minute. I hope you make it with the milk that's left. He did. They did fine. She was a little fussy, but he made it through. Thinking about your recovery and return time, if you don't tell them, they're gonna say, cool, come back. So making the right decision for yourself, but also advocating in your community for maternity leave or for a period of time that is appropriate for recovery before you have to come back. There's a reason the military's built policies around 12 weeks of maternity leave. That seems to be a reasonable time frame for people to recover and start to return to function. In your world, I think that's something that you guys as athletes should help each other understand and help us understand from you. I think I can go back now. I think I need more time before I do this. I can't think of a lot of medical doctors that are going to be able to say, yep, you can start hanging from ropes starting at 2, 4, 6 weeks. But you know what you can do. You know how you feel afterwards, and then you also know what a reasonable time is. So help us help you by having those discussions. This is what I do, this is what I need to return to, and how can I make this work? Childcare around a Vegas schedule is a very interesting thing. I thought in Vegas we were going to have the best community of 24-hour childcare. No. Daycare's open at 7 a.m. They usually close between 5 and 7 p.m. And after that, you're out of luck. We ended up with an au pair, which surprisingly is actually cheaper than daycare. Weird. But I thought those were for bougie people who have all the special things. It's actually a lot different than I expected it to be. But childcare can be really complicated. So forming a community of people who maybe can all be together with those things, or finding resources for childcare, finding family and friends that you can call if something changes, pretty important. Research, documentation, and the way ahead. So we talked about some of the European literature. We talked about where the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology is looking as far as giving some idea. But that doesn't tell us what we need to know, right? In a high-performance world, in a high-performance athlete, like what's safe and what's not safe. It's been my idea for a hot minute now to try and figure out how to test this. And it's something that I'm trying now, coming out of my own pregnancy, to try and figure out how to jumpstart this into research, to figure out, just like what is being done with the bite block for the athletes to find out head trauma and repetitive injury. I want to find out what rotational components, what forces are experienced by, internally during this time. So my goal at some point in the future is to put some probes on some pilots, some athletes, some operators, and see what types of forces are actually felt and transmitted, so we can come back with some actual data and say, yeah, maybe these things are not, crazy for you to fly in a helicopter because it's like buzzing, but baby's in there in a nice little sack of water, and it's like, cool, I'm good. Maybe you can safely do trampoline. Maybe you can safely do acrobatics on a rope. Those are things that I'd like to give more data to, and so I think it's, in the future, the way ahead is actually trying to do research in that direction. My best recommendations. So know that sometimes there's nothing you can do. We talked about that early miscarriage. Finding within yourself what you can and can't live with, for me was, I wanted to take the risks that I knew I would be able to sleep with at night if something happened. I love what I do. I love the people that I work with, and I wanted to do the most that I could and still be able to say, okay, I can live with this. It's the same, to me, level of risk as a car accident or of tripping when I'm falling. I know what I do, and I'm going to tailor that to what I can live with, safe for me and for baby. The best thing for you and for baby is to be fit and healthy. If you are mentally healthy and physically healthy throughout your pregnancy, that is probably the best thing that you can do for you and for baby. And then give yourself grace, because the recovery process is not simple. It's challenging. Having a child is challenging. Trying to manage being a professional athlete or a professional operator and having family is challenging. You can do it. We would love to be a part of your journey. Those of us that are passionate about performance medicine, about operational medicine, we would love to help you learn through that process. We'd like to build a community of people who can support you. And there's some things that make it. Any questions?
I took one. First, I want to go back quickly to Circus Center. It was not my choice. That's actually quite important because there was, because it's a liaison, that's the system was set up. If you're injured, you send you to Concentra, you have no choice because that's what the insurance is saying. So maybe there has to be different systems set up, seeing different doctor right away, seeing different specialists. That's that. And then second one, I actually want to go back to what you spoke about is miscarriage, which is so important because it's, I'm so happy to see that you wrote 15-20% no matter what you do. From our experience, it's a very, it's enormous stress, mental and physical stress, because you still go through delivery, but it's a very painful process, right? And then mentally, then you're asking yourself, was it my fault? Is it me I have to blame? Is it because I did too much? Is it because I didn't do enough? Or is it because of my hard work? Is it that's why I had a miscarriage? So I think it's very important for also for athletes or for artists, maybe to have some kind of this help. Because a lot of times, those women are just kind of forgotten. You go back on stage, but you're not recovered. You're really not recovered. And that takes a long time, and it's a very, very painful process because you have no baby outcome. But you went through all the processes. And then it's a very, I think it's a very touchy subject and extremely important for female health. And for female, even as an employer, maybe they have to help somehow. Under the female team, they need to have a specialist who can help mentally. This kind of issue, not to be self-guilt at that point.
One of the positive things that I hope comes out of doing this year by year is that not only will the athletes hear some of the things that we maybe get a chance to talk about, or we get to hear the things that you talk about, but that hopefully some of the layers that go into the performance community will also hear this, the coaches and the leadership of each performance and the leadership of the large performance companies, because that is what affects change. If your only recourse is to go to an urgent care for your injury, and that's not the right place for you, then the next level of thing that we can do for you as the athletes is get you to a medical community that is actually prepared to appropriately support you. So hopefully what comes out of the things that we're talking about today is some awareness that that is not the right place for you to go. That there is a medical professional team out there that is willing to and capable of helping you through that process, and that we're building that community so that people will allow you to go in the right direction. And 100% with the miscarriages. The military is actually, I was reading a protocol last night that is coming out in the female soft community, and it is for convalescent leave for a miscarriage. So the same type of maternity leave that you would get postpartum, you can actually get written weeks of leave for a miscarriage in the same capacity, because it is an incredibly traumatic thing to go through something so hopeful and to not have it come out with the outcome that you want. And you need the time to mentally refocus before you go out and do something as incredible as what you all do. I couldn't go out and deploy or be out in the field with people shooting at me or shooting at my guys and be thinking about a type of loss like that. So part of the things that we need to build into that women's health is mental health, and it should definitely center around all aspects of that care.
Hi, thank you so much for that great talk. I didn't know all the aspects of overlap between those two, I guess almost like big professions of being a full-time mom as well. I guess I also wanted to ask what your research has been on, yes, of course, like the physical stressors, going through like physical training or high performance, but also with like the mental stressors, because I almost wonder, like, to people doing the same high intensity physical performance, but with different levels of mental stressors, I wonder if that could affect the body in different ways, or physical stressors that are affecting pregnancy, if you have any knowledge on that.
I think mental health is probably more challenging and more or as important as your physical health during a pregnancy. No two people are going to be the same, so trying to say you're going to encounter this, you're going to have postpartum. I didn't have a lot of postpartum depression, but I can tell you that the sleep deprivation has rocked me. But then I have, like I said, one of my really good friends who was on her third pregnancy. She'd been through 2, and her third pregnancy was the severe postpartum depression. No one is going to have the same experience each time. No one is going to have the same experience as someone else. So I think building the awareness of what can, could, and is likely to happen is probably our starting point, saying things as well. So part of that outreach is making sure that everyone is aware that the other aspects of that need to be just as stable as your ability to hold yourself up.
Got time for one more question? If not, let's all thank Dr. Verchinin. Okay, I'm going to do one more slide change. And as I get these slides ready, that's all we drive. Just the one that's called, oh, perfect. So, as we get everything ready, I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Dr. Domanski also works with us in the emergency department at UMC, and she's going to be talking about pain medications and management. So let's all welcome Dr. Domanski.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be talking to you for a little bit about pain and some of the medications we use to treat it. And we're going to bounce around some other topics too, including some historical stuff and some drug development stuff too. A couple of disclaimers. First of all, I have no financial disclosures. No one pays me to talk about drugs. I wish they did, maybe one day they will. Secondly, I'm an ER physician and a toxicologist, which means I deal with pain in the acute setting shortly after the injury has happened. I don't manage it long term. And I also deal with side effects and overdoses of pain medications. So that's kind of my area of expertise, which I'm going to bring into the talk here. So I think everyone in this room has experienced pain, right? It's part of the human experience. You can't get away from it. You can't go through life without having to experience it. And there's actually something called the International Association for the Study of Pain that came up with a formal definition, which you see up there. And it's okay, right? They did a pretty good job of encompassing something like that. But what's happening in the body as we experience pain? First of all, we have these receptors specific for pain called nociceptors. And these are a population of nerve fibers. We have them everywhere: skin, joints, organs, bones, and muscles. And when these guys are stimulated by something unpleasant, right? So too hot, too cold, too sharp, they light up and transmit a pain signal. That's what's going on in our tissues. The next thing we have is something called an inflammatory cascade. So when you break a bone or sprain an ankle, you notice it swells up. Right? Well, on a microscopic level, your body's releasing a whole load of pro-inflammatory chemicals, protein kinases, histamines, and those light up the nerve fibers and transmit a pain signal. That's what's going on in your tissues too. And then how we perceive that pain is what happens when those signals hit the brain tissue. And this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. So our brain perceives two components of pain. And the first one is sensory, right? This is kind of the common sense descriptive stuff. So if I spill a chemical on my hand, this sensory perception is going to tell me I feel a sharp burning pain that's on the back of my hand where the chemical was spilled, right? It doesn't attach emotion. But then we have this affective side of things, which is the unpleasantness aspect of pain. And that's much harder to put into words, right? It's what causes us to have an aversion to pain. It's why words like unbearable, excruciating, nagging kind of resonate with us. And this is an evolutionary thing. It's protective, right? We're not meant to like things that are painful because they're not good for us, right? It's kind of how we evolved as people, right? You stick your hand to the fire, it hurts, right? The cave, when he does that, is not going to do well. The one who kind of pulls the hand away and doesn't do it again is the one that's going to survive and pass on their genes. But those two aspects, the sensory and the affective, actually have two different anatomical sites, right? Two different origins. And the reason we know this is because of a series of experiments done in the 1950s. So our researchers took a group of patients that had advanced cancer and severe pain due to that cancer. And what they did is they gave them lobotomy, which sounds absolutely bizarre, but that was the standard of care at the time. It was an acceptable surgery to do for people. And that surgery severed the nerve fibers that attached the pain pathway to the frontal lobe of the brain that experiences emotion. And what happened to those patients was that they still felt pain, right? They could still tell you they had severe pain, but it didn't bother them. Right? They weren't worried about it. All those words, the nagging, the excruciating, the unbearable, kind of went away, right? Which is kind of an odd finding, and that kind of told us that these two anatomical sites for this pain perception. But unfortunately, these guys had a lot of neurologic side effects, right? Ranging from personality change to complete devastation and becoming non-functional. Lobotomy stopped being done, right? So this is not something we do for our patients anymore, thank goodness. And then we can have pathology without pain, right? It gets really complicated in the brain. I'm sure we've all heard these stories that happen on the battlefield where you have a soldier with horrendous injuries, like gunshot wounds, like torn up limbs, that carries on fighting, right? Or goes back in to rescue their colleagues. And you think this is crazy, right? How could this happen? They had a broken leg. But the brain did not register the pain that was going on, even though all those receptors we just talked about were still working and functional. Then we can have pain without pathology, right? We have patients with functional pain syndromes that do and can feel pain, but there's no limb there, or there's nothing wrong that we can find on a medical level to set off those receptors. All right, so it's kind of complicated. We don't fully understand it as a medical community, but we do know it exists. And then we need to talk about these two terms that are kind of overused and used interchangeably, which is not correct. Right? Pain threshold and pain tolerance. Hands up if you've heard someone say they have a high pain threshold. Everyone, right? Well, those patients are getting it wrong, right? Threshold is the level that something becomes painful or unpleasant. So when does pleasantly warm become too warm, become hot, become ouch, right? That level of ouch is actually reproducible among large groups of people. You get a whole population of humans who put their hands in hot water, and it's actually a pretty narrow range that becomes ouch, right? It's about 43 to 46 degrees C. What actually varies more is pain tolerance, right? How well do we handle pain? How well do we deal with it? Who finds it more painful and who finds it less painful? So we can get the same group of people put their hands in ice water. And you'll get people that will pull out almost immediately, I cannot deal with this. And then you'll get the guys that kind of stand there with their hand in the water and they keep it there for 5 minutes and it doesn't bother them at all. So that's pain tolerance. And that's typically what people mean when they say they have a high pain threshold, is they have a high pain tolerance. And there are studies out there that show that elite athletes do have a higher pain tolerance. They're not just everyone else who sits on the couch, but recreational athletes too. All right, so this was something new for me as an ER physician. When someone who's an elite performer comes in and says they have pain, they might be hiding all sorts of things, right? They might have a broken bone under there that somebody else would be in bed howling and screaming and saying, I can't deal with this. All right, so it's going to make me take performers a bit more seriously when they have pain that's bringing them to the ER, because I know you guys don't like the ER. Right, so what bad injury am I missing? All right, that's a question I'm going to start asking more. So when we think about pain medications, they can target any of those pathways we just talked about. Right, so that inflammatory cascade, or the swelling, all those inflammatory molecules that are released. So we can use steroids, or we can use NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, things like ibuprofen, Toradol, naproxen, all of those guys. We can actually inhibit conduction up the nerve sheath with a local anesthetic like lidocaine. And then we have that central processing, the brain, that perceives the pain. That's also a target for pain medication. And there's a lot of them that hit there, right? The opioids do that, all the antidepressants, the duloxetine, TCAs, some of the anti-epileptic drugs we use for nerve pain, carbamazepine, for example, and then the cannabinoids, which a lot of people use off-label or medicinally for pain. So I wrote down a couple of considerations when I'm treating somebody for pain, right? Specifically an athlete or performer. First of all, what's the nature of the pain? What's the nature of the injury, right? Is it a broken bone versus a cut or scrape? Most of the injuries I see in athletes are going to be musculoskeletal, so those anti-inflammatory medications are probably going to do a lot of good just because they have that anti-inflammatory effect. Adequate pain control, right? Just because this person has a high pain tolerance doesn't mean they need to suffer from it, right? They still deserve to be pain-free, right? So it's not fair to anyone for me to be stingy with pain control. And then there's the delivery mechanism. right? A lot of medications that we prescribe and use are topical. And this is not saying I think about when I'm just with a regular person, where I stick this patch and put this cream on. But if somebody's using a piece of equipment that's metallic, right, and I'm giving them a really greasy ointment, it's going to affect their grip and how their skin interacts with that equipment, that's maybe something to think about, right? Is this patch going to work with a costume? Is it going to affect grip? Is it going to hit the equipment? Is it going to peel off and stick on somebody else? Is it going to fall off mid-show, right? All this stuff that I need to start thinking about when I'm treating performers. And then there's potential for interactions, right? What else are they taking, right? Is this going to affect any other medications that this person may be on? And then interestingly, there's a side effect profile. No medications have no side effects, right? So we have to deal with. So a lot of our pain medications do cause sleepiness. And is that acceptable for somebody who needs to function at a high level, who's working as part of a team, needs to hold or lift, who needs to be aware and have their reflexes intact? Any muscle relaxant that we use acts centrally and causes somnolent sleepiness, right? Flexeril, Xanaflex, Soma, Baclofen, they all make you sleepy. And if I'm not having that conversation with my patient, I'm doing them a disservice, right? I'm going to give you this medication, it's going to affect how you feel, right? It's going to affect how you perform, and is this acceptable to you? Am I just sending you home with a prescription for something you're not going to take because it makes you feel like garbage and you can't function on it? I mean, that way you're not happy, I'm not happy, no, I haven't done my job. Is it going to affect blood pressure or heart rate? Xanaflex or tizanidine is a muscle relaxant we use a lot. And it's related to clonidine, it's related to xylazine, it's in the same group of medications. And what they do is it lowers your blood pressure and it lowers your heart rate. So is that acceptable for somebody who has to raise their heart rate because they're doing a physical job? Right? Is this person going to pass out in the middle of their act because their blood pressure is dipped and their heart rate's dipped, right? That's dangerous. It's something I need to discuss with the patient. What kind of functionality do they need, and is this medication going to affect it? And then things like weight, right? You prescribe someone a course of steroids, usually they gain a few pounds of water weight. If they're on it for a longer term, they gain some more, right? A lot of the antidepressants that we use for pain control, like tricyclics, are associated with weight gain. Is that acceptable to an athlete, right? And am I kind of lying to them by not telling them that? It's got to be a shared decision-making discussion. It's got to have some honesty between you and your patient. And even me in the ER is prescribing a short course, needs to have this talk with somebody. It's not fair for you to start taking your medication and find all this stuff's happened and hey, you didn't tell me about it. We did touch on topical anesthetics, topical medications. Usually these are salicylates, so they're aspirin-based. They smell like wintergreen. You get them from the CVS, whichever pharmacy you use. Or they're lidocaine patches, which is local anesthetics. Usually they don't cause many problems because we don't absorb a lot of it into our body. It doesn't become what we call systemic, right? It's just topical deposits for local pain control. Usually absorb about 2% of those aspirin-based ones over 30 minutes. If you leave it on for 10 hours, it's as much as 20%, but it's not really generally a big dose. But how often is this person using it? How much are they putting on? And are they doing other things that increase absorption of it? Are you wrapping it up with an occlusive dressing, right? Are you putting a grip on it? Is the skin broken, right? Do you have abrasions there from your equipment that's actually going to increase your absorption of that medication? When I was working in the poison center, we did have a case of a young girl who was bathing in salicylates. She had a liquid preparation, she was pouring them into the bathwater and she ended up dying. Because she got a huge dose, because it was warm water over a large area of skin and it was happening every day. So ask, right? Don't just prescribe something and hope it's going to be used as needed, because as needed may be every day for every performance and longer. And then local anesthetics can sometimes cause hemoglobinemia, which is an abnormality of the blood, which causes your lips to turn blue. You see that go to the ER. So pain medications themselves as a group have been part of our culture for millennia, right? Because we as humans don't like pain, it's part of our evolution, it doesn't feel good, we don't want to deal with it, right? So we've been trying to control it since we were really very early on in our humanity. And the first group of pain meds we had were actually opioids, which are always in the news, but they are the oldest group that we know. And the earliest reference to them comes from about 3,000 to 4,000 BC, with people growing poppies, using them medicinally for control of pain. Pretty much every ancient culture used poppy juice and poppy extracts to control pain. Right? The ancient Egyptians used it, the ancient Chinese used it, it was used for war injuries, they'd take it to war with them, they used it for surgeries. And then in the 1600s, somebody had the grand idea of mixing poppy juice with alcohol. Right? And this was something called laudanum. Right? You've probably heard of laudanum if you watch those historical shows. This label here is a little newer than 1680, but it's got 65% alcohol in it. Which is very strong. Usual water is about 40%, so it's stronger than that, plus opium extract. And this isn't medicine, like we know medicine, it's poppy extract, so it's dirty. It contains codeine, papaverine, thebaine, morphine, all the alkaloids that sit within the poppy plant itself. And the quantities vary, right, because each poppy doesn't have the same amount of each of these compounds in them. But everyone loves laudanum, right? It comes from the verb to praise, from Latin. You could go up to the pharmacy and buy a bottle of it, use it at your own discretion, right? Didn't need a prescription. Everyone's having a good time with that. Now we get a little bit more technical. So we get to about 1806, and the German chemist actually isolates morphine from it. So now we've got a medicine. A couple of decades later, we invent the hypodermic needle, so now we're really onto this train of injecting something very potent and very specific. And it's kind of then we realized that this is a problem, and this actually causes addiction. It was around the era of the Civil War. You had a lot of soldiers that had horrendous battlefield injuries, that had battles with amputation, which were done kind of quickly with a knife and so on, whatever they had in the area. And these people got addicted to morphine, so much that addiction became known as the soldier's disease, right? Because so many of the veterans of that era were addicted to morphine. So in comes Bayer. It's the same Bayer that makes aspirin that we know and love. And they decide they're going to make something non-addictive to replace all this morphine that's being abused. You know what they came up with? Heroin. Swing and a miss. You would actually get heroin samples mailed through your door by Bayer. Right? They were that interested in pushing it. Big Pharma's always been around, right? If you want to talk a little bit more detail about heroin, it's very lipid soluble, so it dissolves in fat. And compounds that are lipid soluble love to cross the blood-brain barrier. They hit you really quickly, they diffuse through fat, you get a very instant high from it. So heroin is way more addictive than morphine. It's also stronger. All right, so then we started getting this heroin issue. And the interesting thing was, it took us about 20 years to stop selling heroin. Right? The law and prescribing patterns moved pretty slowly, and they still do. Same thing with this thing called Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. This was an opium extract that was marketed towards babies. It helped them sleep, it stopped them crying, it also stopped them breathing sometimes. The AMA got onto it in 1911, again, nearly 20 years before this product was removed from the shelves. So, why do we have this love-hate relationship with opioids, right? Why do we take us so long to ban them? Why do we use them so much? What's going on here? Because they're great painkillers, but they have all these side effects, right? They cause sedation, you take too much, you stop breathing, they cause nausea and vomiting, they're very addictive. But they work, right? It's probably the best group of painkillers we have for treating bad acute pain, right? You've got a broken bone, you're going to get an opioid, right? So it's an important group of medications to sort of deal with them properly. And the thing that I find really interesting about opioids is that we have receptors for them, right? They fit together like jigsaw puzzle pieces. So if you've got a receptor for something in your body, it means your body has produced somehow, either now or early on in evolution, a molecule that looks and works similarly, right? So we produce endogenous opioid-like substances. We've managed to isolate some of them, right? They're called beta-endorphin, dinorphin A, dinorphin B. So this kind of fascinated a lot of people, not just me, a lot of people before my time, and it actually became this holy grail that people were chasing when they're trying to synthesize analgesics. This is one guy, I'm not going to try and say his last name. He was working for Upjohn in the 70s. And what they were trying to do was create something that was working as well as morphine, right, or better than morphine, right? Something that hit those pain receptors, hit the opioid receptors, but didn't look like morphine, right? And they thought that if we can just change the structure but hit the receptor, we're going to deal with all that addiction stuff, right? It's going to work for pain. We're not going to see those addictive patterns the same way we don't see those addictive patterns with the stuff that our body produces naturally. And they came up with this molecule called U47700, and it's just a serial number. It never got named with a catchy pharma name. But you can see it doesn't look anything like morphine, it just hits the same receptor. So they did some bench work with it. And the first studies that were done with this compound used guinea pig brain. And sure enough, this stuff bound to the receptors for opioids on guinea pig brain about 7.5 times as well as morphine, right? It was great. So then they decided to give it to mice. Now you see that mouse in the middle with his tail kind of hooked up? See that little guy? That's called a Stroud tail, right? It's a sign of addictive behavior. You give a mouse nicotine, it's going to put its tail up in that little kink. And all the mice that got U47700 kinked their tails and got Stroud tails. So even though it didn't look like morphine, it behaved like morphine. It caused all these addictive effects. So it never got given to humans, which is why you've never heard of E47700 or AH7921 or any serial number or something that was being made by the pharmaceutical companies in the 70s, because it wasn't what they were looking for. And we still don't have an answer, right? We don't really have things that bind exclusively to opioid receptors. We don't have that potential. We've got some kind of partial agonist, antagonist, buprenorphine, naloxone we use for addiction. We're still working on those for pain. It's an area that we're working on. So the next thing I wanted to touch on was maybe a new approach, right? Not just looking at receptors, we're looking at individuals and genetics. All this stuff's kind of cool. Everyone's done 23andMe, seeing how we're all genetically different, and can we use this stuff for pain control? So we're going to talk about codeine, right? We've known this for a while. We're just kind of starting to use this concept. So codeine molecule itself is a really crappy painkiller. It doesn't do much. When you put it in the human body, we have an enzyme called cytochrome 2D6 that metabolizes it down to morphine. And that metabolite, the morphine that the codeine has been made into, is what works on pain. See those two jaguars in the top? They're both jaguars from the same species, but one's a light morph, one's a dark morph, right? They have different genetic variants. And in the same way, we have different genetic variants for that 2D6 enzyme within our population. We're all different, right? So some of us in this room, anywhere between 0.7 to 9 of us, are ultra-rapid metabolizers. And we have an enzyme that loves to metabolize codeine to morphine, right? So you give us a codeine pill, we're going to metabolize, make a whole lot of morphine a whole lot fast. And we actually have a risk of getting overdosed on it. About 0.4 to 6% of us are poor metabolizers. We have an enzyme that doesn't like to metabolize codeine at all. We're going to get minimum morphine out of it. So if we give that person some codeine for their sprained ankle or broken bone, they're not going to make any morphine at all. They'll be like, where's my pain meds? It's not working. And we've got people in the middle, that's kind of most of us. So when patients tell you this pain medicine doesn't work for me, maybe they're right. Maybe they've got this genetic variant. It means they don't make the metabolite that works. Right, so that's something we're beginning to consider. And a bit more work is going into, like, is there genetic variability between us as individuals within populations that make certain pain medicine work better than others? We have a similar story with some of the non-steroidals. This is something called cytochrome 2C9, which is another enzyme that metabolizes certain medications. And these are your shorter-acting non-steroids like ibuprofen or celecoxib or Celebrex. This study looked at side effect profiles, right? So people that did not metabolize well enough had more of the medicine lingering in their system. They got more gastrointestinal irritation, more GI bleeding from it. That's something else to consider, right? Not only does this medicine work, but is it going to cause a bunch of side effects in this person? We don't have enough information for this to be real, like, prescribing pattern right now, but it's something that's new and up and coming and well worth keeping an eye on. For now, it's just shared decision making, right? Listen to your patient. What have they used before? What's worked? What really doesn't work for them? Why are some people getting more gastrointestinal effects with non-steroidals? Maybe different non-steroidals work differently for different people, right? Does naproxen work better than ketorolac? Right? Listen to your patient, what works for them. And finally, my take-home points. Most of the pain we're treating with athletes in the acute setting is musculoskeletal. Right? Some of it's not going to be, but most of it's that, so I'd probably reach for an NSAID first. Athletes have a higher pain tolerance. Look for the bad injury that's being missed, right? This is the person who's going to walk in on a fractured leg. And then some side effects may not be safe or acceptable for the performer or the people they work with. All right, bear that in mind. Ask. I don't know half your disciplines. I love learning about them, but I don't know. So please take the time and tell me. Maybe you'll see me in the ER. I hope I never see any of you in the ER, because I don't want you to get hurt. But if we meet, please let me know what you do and how I can help with that. In response to what using may vary. That's it.
Hi, thank you for the talk. So you mentioned that elite level athletes and high level athletes have like a higher pain tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
Is that genetic? Is it learned? How do we understand that? And how do we know that the athletes aren't just lying on surveys and stuff saying I don't feel the pain, you know?
It's probably a combination of multiple factors. Right? I doubt it's genetic unless they have a real family history of the same sport and the same athleticism going down. It's training to a degree. And we do know it encompasses different types of pain, from ischemic pain to cold pain to hot pain, so it's kind of global. It may be just a toughness of feeling the pain but working through it, or it may be that learning to work through pain actually reduces how we feel. We don't understand all of it. We just know that an athlete can tolerate it for longer and more strong pain than somebody who does not exercise.
I'm curious about, in the last couple of years, I learned about like mental chronic pain for those that have been experiencing maybe an injury or some type of pain for such a long period of time, but they've recovered, but they believe that they're still in pain from their perspective in toxicology and maybe even substance abuse. When you have somebody that they seem perfectly fine, there's nothing that, maybe an athlete that in all things visual or physical, they don't seem to be suffering, but they convince themselves that they're still in pain. What's the approach to that? How do we, is it actually a thing? How do we work something out of it if it is? Both in conversation and as a medical approach.
I don't think this is a whole sort of like one size fits all. I think it's going to be individual. I do think we have a lot to learn about chronic pain. I don't think we fully understand it. We did understand neuropathic pain for a long time. Now we know it exists. It responds sort of to some medications. Phantom limb pain, for example, the limb is not there, but the person still feels pain. Whereas that is it the cortex, is it the separate nerve endings? We don't really know. We do know that a lot of the medications that work for mood stabilization, like carbamazepine, or antidepressants like duloxetine, work for chronic pain. Now, are they working because they're affecting the mental health? Or are they working because they affect sodium channels? Because a lot of them do affect sodium channels that are involved in nerve conduction. And we don't quite have that information on which component of this medication is fixing it, which is not fixes it. So we're kind of primitive in what we know so far. It's an emerging field. I do think there's probably a role in talking therapy. I don't think we should lobotomize anybody. I think it's somewhere in between.
I know there's a lot of restrictions, or some say like a war on opioids currently going on. I know several people that have a very difficult time getting prescribed opioids for chronic pain. I was wondering if you had anything to add to, like, if there was anything being addressed to address that particular problem with people actually getting access to the right medication.
I think this is a pendulum, right, within the medical community, right? When I first started training, you went to the ER, you got a souvenir, everyone got some opioids. Now the pendulum's gone the other way, it's become very difficult to get them. The happy medium is probably somewhere in the middle. I would probably advise the best way to do is to get hooked up with pain management and have one prescriber. That's the easiest and most consistent way to get opioids for your chronic pain, if that's what you need. To have a medical home. I know it's very difficult for us to prescribe from the ER because of the restrictions, which sometimes is very difficult, right? Because if somebody has a kidney broken bone or a kidney stone, it's a medication you need, right? There's a lot of restrictions, hoops to jump through, paperwork to fill out. It's designed to help, but actually, I think causes some harm in some way.
We have time for 2 more questions, one here and then one there.
Thank you for your talk. I was curious if you had any experience or any interest in one of the emerging new fields in dealing with addiction with these new substances. There are psychotherapeutic trials currently going on in the United States and a couple other countries. I was curious if you have any experience with this psychotherapy, or if you have any interest in the field at all.
I'd be interested in collaborating. I have no experience. So if you're willing to take a rookie,
Okay, our last question.
So I'm a triple MUT and I'm in constant pain. Do you have a certain medication that would help, that would not cause like long-term side effects?
I'll start with the fact that I'm an EM physician. Okay, so the thing that I don't do is manage chronic pain over a long period of time. And you probably have a lot of different components to your pain. It may be nerve, maybe muscle, maybe structural. And this probably needs to be addressed individually with a different approach, trial error, finding a medication or combination of medications that work for you. I wish I had an answer. I wish I could give you this one medication that would fix everything and make you feel wonderful and take all your pain away. The reality is it's probably going to be a trial and error kind of thing. And I hope you find somebody that specializes in it that can help.
change it over slideshows to our last day. So I'm going to introduce our last two speakers, which is going to be Professor John Mercer, as well as Alina Swafford. And they're going to come talk about biomechanics. They're from the kinesiology department from UNLV. So they've been working with me and Scott on a bunch of our research that we've been doing, trying to study and better understand the biomechanics and the actual nitty-gritty of what goes on in the body for these performers. So help me in welcoming Dr. Mercer and Dr. Swafford.
Oh, thanks so much. Yeah, this is going to be sort of fun. I'm going to give a big picture perspective of sports science, and then we're going to bring it down to biomechanics specifically. And Alina will talk more specifically about some work that we have been doing with Nate and Scott's group. So this will be fun. So what is sports science? So this is a term that's used to mean a lot of different things, and it means something different depending on who you're talking with. And we have all these different fields in here: sports science, sport analytics, sport nutrition, sport management. We have all these different areas that have sport connected to it. And then we also have things like strength and conditioning, coach athletic training, physical therapy, so forth. There's a lot connected with sports science. And so it does take there's some advantage to taking a step back and defining what this actually means. And this is not an exhaustive list at all. So using some recent references that came out in Strength and Conditioning Journal, this is a nice definition of sports science, a field which multiple scientific disciplines are studied and applied concurrently to understand and improve sport performance. That just sounds so sophisticated and very nice to land on. You know, another way that I describe sports science is it's the application of science to understand sport. And we still have to define sport, if you will, but if we think of it for the context of what we're talking about here, sport can be a lot of different things, but it's exercise, it's movement, with sometimes rules associated with those movements. But it also can encompass things like training, rehabilitation program, tactics, team tactics, technique, and ultimately performance, how well we do something. So sports science, the other way I describe sports science is I use two perspectives, or two lenses that I look through when I talk about sports science. The first lens is, how do we help somebody use our science understanding of sport? How do we help them right now? How do we help a team? How do we help an individual to improve their performance or improve something related to movement? That's one lens. The other lens and the other perspective that I describe sports science as operating under is, how do we generate knowledge over a long-term period? Good to see you. How do we generate knowledge over a long-term period? And that does take a long time. So for example, some work that Alina and I did, we collected data probably 5-6 years ago, and we just published the paper this year. It takes a long time to actually generate a published manuscript, even though that's even more current information than something like a textbook. And we'll find that we can collect a lot of information, but we have to take that information and ultimately generate knowledge out of that information. So those are the two perspectives. Who are we trying to help? Well, this model also came out in the same issue of Strength and Conditioning Journal, and I really liked it because it sort of describes what we're talking about in here, is that we can have performance on the x-axis, and we can have health on the y-axis, and we can have, over in the top right quadrant, we can have healthy people who are high performers. Now, healthy, as come up in this discussion today, health can mean everything from physical all the way over to mental health. So it's a broad term to describe how well someone is actually doing. And we can also have healthy underperformers. For underperformers, we can have unhealthy underperformers and unhealthy high performers. So really what we want to do is use science to move people to that top right quadrant. And we want to move them away from these unhealthy or underperforming quadrants. So how do we use sports science? Well, how do we help right now to prevent injury, rehabilitate from an injury, learn a skill, maybe something about being stronger, or fitness? All right, how do we help a person or a team in this acute time window? And then how do we generate knowledge over that long period of time where we start talking about how do you understand how injuries happen, so mechanisms of injury, what's the evidence-based practice for rehabilitation or exercise prescription, and maybe we even generate new knowledge about equipment design or ultimately using big data analytics to answer big questions. And to get those big data analytics, we need to collect data over a long period of time. So what is a sports science program? And this is what we're sort of talking about in this session. And I really appreciate that Nate and Scott put this conference together, because this is really leading to a sports science program. Well, sports science can be both interdisciplinary, where different disciplines are working together, or it can be multidisciplinary, where each discipline is working independent, but then that information has to come together. And there's benefits of each of these approaches. So this is just sort of a schematic of a sports science program where all these different areas, disciplines, training areas, are all coming together to ultimately help this athlete. And all those little circles in the middle are even other areas. So this is not an exhaustive list. And some of the things we've even talked about today are not on this list. The area that I come from are biomechanics, innovation, and physiology. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But what's interesting about this program is to help sport performance, to help with the health of an artist, of an athlete, you need all these different pieces. The problem with this model is often the athlete or the artist is left taking in all these different pieces of information to understand how to help them. And so that's a challenge. And again, this is why I really appreciate what Nate and Scott are advocating for, is this more broad approach to understanding how to help circus artists. I'll echo what Scott talked about in the introduction. Las Vegas, my goodness, we have grown in our sport industry in such a short period of time. From UFC coming here, then the Golden Knights, and so forth, all these different professional sport teams. And Las Vegas and UNLV has really moved the dial in terms of appreciating sports science and what sports science can bring to professional athletes. And what we always talk about, and I bring this up at meetings on that with different organizations, is that Las Vegas has always had high-performing athletes and elite athletes, and that's the circus artists. And that has been our constant here in Las Vegas. And so how do we help performers? How do we help artists? How do we help them avoid injuries? How do you help them rehabilitate injuries? There's not necessarily a strong body of research, especially in the biomechanics world, on these types of movements. And why is that? I've lost sleep over trying to figure out how to quantify some of the movements that you folks do. Let me see if I can play this. This is this is supposed to be in slow motion, so I must have maybe play through once and then we'll play again. I know most of you are familiar with this type of maneuver. Oh yeah, there it is. Now it's in slow motion. This is an amazing artistic movement that you folks do very commonly. But for a biomechanist to try to quantify this movement, this is a nightmare. You've got spring force. The spring force is dependent on where the artist hits the trampoline bed. The artist is interacting with the wall. The artist is having up and down movement, side to side movement, fore aft type of movement, rotations, all combined. Incredibly difficult to try to pull that information out in a way that we can quantify and then ultimately analyze and then provide actionable information to the artist to either help them learn the skill, avoid injury, or rehabilitate or what have you. So incredibly complex. The other problem we have is a lot of our instruments don't work well when we're doing this type of dynamic maneuver. And so that's what we're going to talk about in just a bit here, is some instruments that we've been exploring to try to use to quantify this type of movement. So when I go down the biomechanics approach, I define biomechanics really simply as the physics of sport. So we're using mechanics, we're using mechanical principles to really understand movement. And we have a wide variety of tools available, even here at UNLV and elsewhere, but these are some tools that we have. Smart fabrics, which we're going to talk about in more detail, accelerometers, inertial measurement units, wireless electromyography, waterproof electromyography, and so forth. And we're even trying to launch a speed lab, which is going to be a mobile facility, to be able to take this lab outside of our physical lab and do work out in the field. So sport performance, education, and economic development type of lab. And this is amazing to see the change in technology over the last decade. Right now, you can go buy an inertial measurement unit for $50 off of Amazon. Back when I did my PhD work, which would have been the mid-90s, so we're talking 25, 30 years ago, I was spending $1,000 for accelerometers, let alone even having gyroscopes. So the technology has gotten smaller, it's become wireless, it's become more portable, but there's also become some challenges with that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So I'm going to bring up Alina to talk more about some of the tools that we're using right now to do this type of work.
So it's going to be an exciting 1 minute part of the presentation. But so myself and Dr. Mercer and Nate and Scott, we've all kind of come together as a collaborative project to kind of do some preliminary testing for the CERC data collection. As he said, it can be kind of nightmarish to collect these really complex movements and then kind of decide what we do with it from there. So some instruments that kind of pique our interest, which is this kind of smart garment, as accelerometers, gyroscope, magnetometers, I knew I was going to mess that word up, electromyography, so EMG, kind of into these smart garments. And it's kind of new, so we've kind of been testing with it, but it's essentially a shirt that has 3 sensors, 1 on the chest, 2 on the sides, and a pair of shorts that just has a sensor in the middle, which also kind of limits how we can move, because you don't want to land on the trampoline on the front, because that's going to be very painful. Oh, so a cool video, which I didn't turn the sound off, so my bad. So you can see Scott here is doing some movements, and obviously they're super complex, so what we're trying to do right now is, sorry, that's going to be super loud. I'll just let it play out, so we'll stop. I don't want to touch anything, just in case something goes wrong. Oh, fair. I can let it play through again if you guys want to watch it, because it is in slow motion, but essentially we're trying to collect a bunch of different movements that CERC artists do, because it's not really out there, and then from there we're going to try to figure out what to do with that data. Can we use it? Can we move forward with it? Can we collect a bunch of artists that do similar things and maybe kind of create profiles? But here you can see he's wearing this smart shirt and shorts, and we have the right arm, the left arm, they both collect IMU data, which is the acceleration, gyroscope, mag data, and then on the chest it collects everything but the chest for some reason, but in EMG data, and then we have the shorts which just collect EMG, but we also have a new sensor that will also collect IMU data. But that's kind of where we're at right now, and then hopefully we have more data research to come. And then back to John.
Yeah, and it is really interesting how challenging this type of work is. And I said hi to Sean earlier because actually Sean introduced me to this whole world of doing these types of 3D movements. And what we often do is we take a complex movement like we just saw and we reduce it to a single movement, maybe just landing from a jump or jumping upwards, and we studied that part. And with Sean's work, we actually did some standing backflips, and we took something that was one part of a movement that he was doing and his group were doing, and try to understand that. And that was still complex. And so what we're trying to do is come up with a number of research projects that we can quantify the movement. And again, with the end goal being that we have some information we can give back to the user, generate knowledge over a long period of time, and have some actionable things that we can help people with. So we're starting everything from a descriptive type of study, so just describing the kinematics and the kinetics, that how recovery type of project, or to try to provide a recovery intervention, some type of garment that people can wear in between sessions, maybe even having some type of predictive running, not let alone something complex like these trampoline type of movements that we've seen here. So at the end of the day, though, success of a good sports science program, which is integrating a lot of different information, is collaborations amongst faculty, sport industry, students, and other community members, and ultimately we want to optimize health and maximize performance. And with that, I'll go ahead and end and take any questions.
Thank you for this talk. I have 2 questions. First off, what, like I was talking with Nate about this a few weeks ago, and talking about NFL, all these other sports that are part of the North American culture that have all the resources already ramped up, and dude, one of these NFL quarterbacks could sneeze and people could tell them 6 reasons why, you know what I mean? Like, if they analyze everything. What other sports have you been able to tap into resource-wise? Because surely their athletes are being analyzed, every movement they make, like you see, you know what I mean, like golf, like all the famous ones. And that's my first question. The second question, I don't know if you can answer it, but in terms of maximizing performance, if you were to use the research to help predict, this is how the most successful wall jumper, is that what it's called? I'm so sorry. What is it? Trample artist. Okay, artist, sorry. Tramp wall artist, I'm sorry, thank you. I'm learning something every day, but if you see that tramp wall artist doing their, executing that move, you guys know how your body feels in your training to know I'm gonna stick this landing or something's off. How would they use that to correct, to modify? I don't know if you can answer that question, I'm just curious.
No,
we want to make them better.
Yeah, that's a great question. So your first question on resources available, this is evolving now, and the sports science type program is really emerging. In fact, this model that just came out was just from one of the most recent issues on strength and conditioning. So this is something that's really coming to the forefront because there's so much data being collected right now. You have data from your watch, your phones, and what have you. Well, the trick is, how do you take all that information and then turn it into actionable items? What does it mean that we can measure forces during tramp wall? Well, how is that going to help him? And some of the things that we've been talking about, and this only comes through lots of conversations, and this is what we've been doing, is just sort of brainstorming. We've been getting together and saying, okay, yeah, we can measure that, but how will that help you? And so that's where I'm not a circ artist. I have background in springboard diving, but that's not what I do. And so I need that information to be able to help understand what those data mean. And that's why we need more of a community of professionals doing this type of work. What resources are available? Well, the professional teams are moving in the direction of having sports scientists, and you're seeing that more and more on their teams, job postings, that they'll hire sports scientists. Sometimes they don't call it that. It's something close to that. And we've had some of our students have gone to work for these different teams. UFC has a performance institute where they're doing this type of work, where they're trying to measure lots of different things to help their athletes train and prevent injury. But taking it down to the youth level that I think you mentioned, I'm sorry, I have a hearing problem. I try to hear everything, but it's hard. But even going down to the youth level, there's not as much there, but there are sport academies that have been formed where they are trying to use more of the science and the measurement of movements to try to help move athletes through a program. But that opens up a whole nother door of that multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary aspect of sport performance is predictive value. We can't predict from a youth who's going to be successful in which sport. And so, but that is one of the ideas that a lot of people want to work towards, is how do you have a talent development type of program. So then your second question, I'm sorry, remind me of the, listen.
using all the data you gather, since you were talking about correcting or improving these super athletes' performance?
I love it. When I do this type of work, I tell people I'm not a coach. I can collect data, I can think about things, I can write things down, I can analyze, but I'm not coaching someone. And so this is where I would need a coach to be able to sit there and you collaborate together and say, okay, here's the information I've got. How are you as a coach going to be able to use that information to help the athlete? And so even when I go back to this different perspective of sports science, these could be two very different groups of people, and they have different types of training. You have people who are interacting with athletes, interacting with coaches, and presenting information that is understandable. The knowledge part, look at my colleagues, we often write papers that maybe no one else outside our world really gets, right? That's a different type of communication that we're having amongst other people that have the similar type of training. And so how do you take this information that we're collecting and apply it? It's a team approach. We need someone else there to be able to communicate with athletes and communicate with coaches.
Dr. Mercer, fascinated by your talk. Thank you very much. You've talked at length about how can we take this data, how can we aggregate it and turn it into something valuable. I'm curious, you showed some of the electromyography that you have so far, some of the IMU data. Thus far, what has been the closest to a breakthrough, the closest to actionable information? Which direction have these metrics taken you, if any, thus far, or is it still really too early to understand where it can likely be applied first?
I love it. Nothing in the circus world on my end yet, because we're at a stage that we're actually working on a technical note describing how to collect information during certain movements, and that's the level that we're at. Let me just go back to this model to speak to your point in terms of what impact research has. A lot of research is designed what we call a group design project, where we take a lot of people and we generate information on the average response, and that can be helpful. But what our lab has a lot of work in and have led the way on what we call single subject type analysis, where we actually take the individual and we're interested in how the information is important for that one person. And that's a very different type of statistical approach and design of an experiment. But that sort of speaks to this model is we want to look for the individuals. We don't want to just do an aggregate of all these people, because that aggregate will probably land right at the origin of this model. When really what we want to do is be able to identify people in that quadrant, identify people in this quadrant, and then have programs that help them to move from one quadrant to another. Just as an example, where research has helped cross the bridge into application, some work that I've done on body weight support running. So runners are very susceptible to overuse injuries. And some work that I've done really over about 30 years is using running in the water. And I've done a wide number of research projects on running in the water. We measure muscle activity, we measure VO2, we measure heart rate, we measure perceived exertion, and then we probably have the experiments over the last 30 years. Out of all those experiments, we've been able to come to some very actionable items for people. If you're going to use running in the water to transfer a fitness on land, you have to try harder in the water than you would on land. Well, that's so simple, but that's what we need to do, is we need to reduce all that work that I've done over 30 years and say, go use running in the water. It's a great way to train for on land, but you have to be trying harder in the water than you do on land. And that's the type of information that we need to get ultimately back to the circus performer, is some very actionable things. We don't need to overwhelm them with data, overwhelm them with charts and what have you. We need to bring it down to a level that's very purposeful.
You had talked about kind of the need for interdisciplinary approach to sports science. I'm curious, I knew of a engineering class. The professor was big lover of flying trapeze. And so she had her class design predictive models on the physics of flying trapeze. They then went and they spent time training it and see how the predictions compared. Have you used any prediction models and compared it to kind of what you're finding in the actual data?
Yeah, the predictive models are a lot of fun to work with. In fact, I use them a lot in teaching. So one of the predictive models I have in my mind is or platform diving, not even springboard diving, because once you add in a springboard, that adds a level of complexity that's pretty hard. But platform diving, and the way the predictive model worked was you could modify how the knee changed. So knee angle during jumping. And you'd say, okay, here's knee flexion, here's knee extension. Let's change that to less knee flexion, less knee extension. And then let's see what happens to the jump. And so I'd always do this during class, and you get this model of a person flying through the air, and it's amazing how much one minor change in joint movement can ultimately have on the prediction of what the movement would actually look like. So it becomes really helpful in terms of a teaching tool. We also use another teaching tool for our class where we are able to change the acceleration profile of someone moving or change the velocity profile. And then you can see the resulting kinematics that happened. And so I use the prediction model more so in a teaching environment than I do in a research environment.
So building off of the first question, where we have this body of literature mainly funded by the big sports. So when I think about shoulders, for example, right? There's a million studies about baseball players' shoulders. And I'm curious, as a researcher, how do you think about potential bias that might have created in the literature? So for example, a hand balancer, the way that hand balancers use their shoulders over time would be completely different than baseball players, but so much of the shoulder literature would be influenced by baseball. So curious about your thoughts about bias in the research landscape as a whole for sports science.
Well, bias is a challenge. And the peer-reviewed literature, the idea is that process is in place to help reduce the risk of bias. That's the idea. But it still has different ways, bias still has different ways that it can find a way into a research paper. And like you said, who's funding the project? And when we start talking about academic industry partnerships, where we partner with a company to develop a product, well, now all of a sudden that's a potential bias that we end up having. And we need to be really careful when we do that type of work. Something that journals have really emphasized, really the last 5-10 years, is if you have any conflict of interest, you have to disclose it. And then they flush it out a little bit more. Who are you receiving money from to do this project? And you have to put an acknowledgement in the paper and let the reader know that this project was funded by X company. And then the reader can look at the information and hopefully try to tease out where a bias might actually have gotten in. But this is, again, the idea behind a peer-reviewed project is that that bias can be removed. And this is why sometimes the way that we write papers, we write them in a very technical manner to try to bring out or to reduce that bias that enters into it. But in research, you see this all the time where you get camps of people who believe something, and sometimes they approach science with the idea of proving that they're right versus trying to disprove that they're right. And science, I always say, we're negative people. We take a negativistic approach to something that we want to know. Because really we're supposed to design experiments to disprove our ideas as opposed to prove our ideas. But you do see different camps in different research worlds. In the running world, people who say, well, you should wear this type of shoe, or this type of shoe, or no shoe. And those are different camps that end up forming, unfortunately, because of the bias. So I don't have a good answer that the bias isn't there. I think what's important is try to recognize as a reader when there is a bias.
So you mentioned that, at least in the example that you gave with your data and the presentation, that it took 5 or 6 years before data collection to publication. Given that lag time, have you noticed that in the field with performers, do they change their methods? Have you noticed they change their techniques, maybe the way they perform certain movement, maybe the way they transfer certain movement, or maybe the movements in themselves that make that lag time significant?
Say the last part of the question again. So do they take the data and?
So when you take the data, it takes about, you said about 5 or 6 years sometimes before you could publish that data. In that 5 or 6 years, have you seen that the athletes and performers may change the way they do things?
Yes. So there's always this sort of ebb and flow of what is happening in the real world and what's happening in the lab. And a lot of times what happens in the real world does sort of precede what actually is happening in the lab. Because the time to do a project takes longer. Right now we are dealing with trying to tease out how this instrument, this smart garment actually works. They're selling the smart garment. People are using it. But we're having conversations with them, and it's a time lag because they're over in Norway. And so you've got a big time gap there. But it takes time to try to flush out, does this instrument really do what they say it does? But in the meantime, it's being used. And so you're spot on that there is some use out there. The challenge of what happens is you may see this product being used, or whatever product, I'm not referring to any particular product, you may see it being used, and then the research comes along and says, it's not really doing what you think it does. And so now you've had that misdirection of information, but now you've got to correct. But this is what coaching's doing all the time, trying different things and seeing what's happening, and it has to sort of lead the way in terms of innovation. But it does take a while for the research to catch up with them. Again, not a very satisfying answer, I know, but the research just takes a long time because we are very meticulous in terms of how to go about the information. When we get the information, we have to vet it, we have to go through it, we look at it, we reanalyze it, look at it again, maybe do another project. And so it's a very slow process. And I appreciate the patience that Nate and Scott have allowed in working with this, because it seems like, oh, let's do this next weekend. And it's like, well, okay, but there's a lot of other things that have to happen. And this happens with our sport industry partners all the time, is that businesses work on a different calendar than academics. And it's a little bit hard to sometimes keep pace with things.
So that's all.
Thank you.
And so with that, that is our morning session. We're going to take a break for lunch. I will direct everyone to kind of where the food court is. We're going to go out and just be like straight down that way. But before we leave, if all our presenters could come up, we're going to take a group picture before we do lunch. But we're going to take a break for lunch. We're going to reconvene here at 3 p.m. So we'll see everyone back here at 3 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
There are also tons of food options across the street or all around here, so whatever dietary restrictions you might have or just tastes, check out Google Maps.
this a lot.